At my son's graduation from McGill as the valedictorian, he thanked everyone who made him successful, including his mother, his professors, and his stepfather, Richard. He looked out at the crowd and said, "Richard, you have shown me what it means to have a father who truly invests in my future and understands the value of image." But he never mentioned me. The man who paid $200,000 in tuition fees simply ceased to exist in his narrative, so I stood up right in the middle of his speech and walked out. 2 months later, when his $120,000 dream job disappeared, and he came begging for my help, expecting a hidden trust fund, I looked him in the eye and told him the truth. It was already gone. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I am Eldridge Hayes, 68 years old, and for 40 years my hands have been covered in callus and concrete dust. I am a man who speaks with the foundation of a building rather than the decoration on the facade. People look at me and they see a retired laborer. They see the flannel shirts I wear and the old Ford truck I drive, and they assume my bank account is as empty as the bed of that truck. They do not know that I owned the largest minority-led contracting firm in Chicago before I sold it quietly 5 years ago. They do not know that the skyline of this city has my sweat mixed into the mortar. They see only what they want to see, which is an old man who has outlived his usefulness. My son Kendrick sees even less than that. He sees a relic. He sees a source of embarrassment. My ex-wife Francine sees a wallet that she thought had run dry years ago. And Richard, her new husband, sees a mark, a simpleton. He can outshine with leased luxury cars and credit card debt. Today was supposed to be the culmination of my life's work. It was the day my son became the first Hayes to graduate from a university, not just any university, but McGill in Montreal. It was a hot, humid day in late spring, the kind of day where the air feels heavy and sticks to your skin. The graduation ceremony was held in a massive tent on the lower field of the campus, surrounded by historic gray stone buildings that looked like castles. I arrived early wearing my best Sunday suit. It is not a designer label. It is a charcoal gray wool suit I bought at a department store 10 years ago, but it is clean pressed and fits me well. I walked to the entrance of the VIP section holding my ticket. The usher, a young girl with a polite smile, looked at my ticket and then looked at me. "I am sorry, sir," she said, pointing to the back. "This ticket is for the general seating area. The reserved section is full." I looked at the ticket again. It was the one Kendrick had mailed to me weeks ago. He had told me over the phone that he had secured front row seats for the family. I did not make a scene. I never make scenes. I just nodded and walked to the general seating area, which was nothing more than rows of folding metal chairs set up on the grass far behind the stage. As I found a seat squeezed between a crying baby and a large pillar that blocked half my view, I saw them. In the front row, under the shade of the VIP canopy, sat Francine. She was wearing a hat so large it looked like a satellite dish, and next to her was Richard. He was wearing a cream-colored linen suit that looked expensive from a distance. But I know construction and I know fabric. Up close, I would bet my pension that it was a polyester blend, possibly rented. He was laughing loudly, slapping the back of the dean of the university as if they were old friends. And there sat Meredith, my new daughter-in-law. She is 23 years old with blonde hair and a smile that disappears the moment I enter a room. She was taking a selfie with Richard, captioning it undoubtedly with something about successful families. I sat there in the back, wiping sweat from my forehead with a handkerchief. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. It was not a heart attack. It was the weight of silence. The silence of knowing that the check for $50,000 for Kendrick's final year of tuition had cleared my account just last month. The silence of knowing that for 4 years I had worked extra consulting jobs just to ensure he graduated without a dollar of student loan debt. I wanted him to start his life at zero, not in the negative. I wanted him to have the freedom I never had. But freedom, it seems, has a way of making people forget the cost of the key. The ceremony began. Speeches were made. Names were called. I watched hundreds of students walk across the stage waiting for my boy. And finally, it was time for the valedictorian address. Kendrick walked up to the podium. He looked sharp. I will give him that. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit beneath his gown. He looked confident, handsome, and utterly detached from the reality of where he came from. He adjusted the microphone and smiled that charismatic smile that always melted his mother's heart. "Thank you, Dean, faculty, and fellow graduates," Kendrick began. His voice boomed through the speakers, reaching all the way back to where I sat behind the pillar. He spoke about resilience, he spoke about vision, he spoke about the future. It was a good speech. Well rehearsed, but then came the acknowledgments. I sat up a little straighter, I adjusted my tie. This was the moment. Every father waits for this moment, the moment your child acknowledges that they did not get there alone. I want to thank my mother, Francine Kendrick said, gesturing to the front row. Your belief in me never wavered. You taught me that I was destined for greatness. Francine stood up, waving her handkerchief, dabbing at dry eyes. The crowd applauded gently. Then Kendrick paused. He looked down at the front row again, specifically at the man in the cream-colored suit. And I want to give a special thank you to Richard. My breath caught in my throat. Waited for him to say my name next. I waited for him to say, and to my father Eldridge. But the sentence continued without me, Richard. He said, his voice thick with emotion. You came into my life and showed me what it means to be a modern man. You taught me that success is not just about hard work, but about smart positioning. You invested in my future, not just with resources, but with a vision of who I could be. You are the father figure who truly understands the world I am entering. Thank you for showing me that we choose our family based on shared ambition. The crowd erupted in applause. Richard stood up, buttoning his jacket, waving to the crowd with both hands like a politician who had just won an election. Meredith was clapping so hard I thought her bracelets would shatter. Francine was beaming. I sat frozen. The applause around me felt like physical blows. Each clap was a slap in the face. Shared ambition. That was the phrase. Investing in his future, Richard had not paid a dime. I knew this for a fact. Richard was a financial consultant whose own credit score I had checked out of curiosity. It was lower than the temperature in a Chicago winter. But Richard knew how to talk. He knew how to order wine. He knew how to pretend. And apparently that was what my son valued. I looked down at my hands. These hands that had laid brick in freezing rain. These hands that had signed checks for private schools for summer camps for that semester in Europe. These hands were not sophisticated enough for Kendrick. They were the hands of a worker, and Kendrick was now a man of finance, a man of the mind. I felt something snap inside me. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a bridge collapsing under too much weight. I realized in that moment that I was not just unappreciated. I was invisible. I was a utility, a resource to be used and then hidden away, like a ladder after the painting is done. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. My fingers brushed against a thick envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $10,000. It was my graduation gift to him, a little nest egg to help him furnish his new apartment or take a vacation before starting work. I had planned to give it to him at the dinner afterwards, quietly just between men. But now the envelope felt hot in my pocket. It felt like a lie. I stood up. The metal chair scraped loudly against the concrete path. The woman with the crying baby looked up at me, startled. The people behind me grumbled because I was blocking their view. But I did not care. I stepped out into the aisle. I am a big man, broad-shouldered and tall. When I move, people tend to move out of the way. I did not look down. I looked straight ahead at the stage. Kendrick was still smiling, basking in the applause for his tribute to Richard. But then his eyes caught movement. He looked up and saw me. We locked eyes across the sea of black caps and gowns. He was hundreds of feet away, but I saw him stiffen. He saw me standing there, a towering figure in gray amidst the seated crowd. He saw me turn my back. He saw me start walking toward the exit, explicitly walking away from him while he was still on stage. The smile faltered on his face. He stumbled slightly on his next word. The microphone picked up a sharp intake of breath. But I kept walking. I walked past the rows of proud parents. I walked past the professors in their colorful robes. I walked past the security guards at the perimeter. The sound of his voice faded behind me, replaced by the rushing of blood in my ears. I reached the large trash cans near the exit gate. I stopped. I pulled the envelope from my pocket. I looked at it one last time. $10,000. That represented 2 months of grueling work on the Harris Project back in the 90s. That represented missed dinners and aching joints. I took the check out of the envelope. The paper was crisp, cool, and heavy. I did not tear it in half quickly. I did it slowly, methodically. I ripped it once down the middle. The sound of the thick paper tearing was more Satisfying than any applause, I ripped the halves again and again until the cashier's check was nothing but confetti. I dropped the pieces into the trash can on top of empty soda bottles and discarded programs. A security guard watched me curiously. "Is everything all right, sir?" he asked, thinking I was perhaps ill or confused. I looked at him, and for the first time all day I smiled. A genuine smile. "Everything is perfect," I said. "I just lightened my load." Then I walked out of the gate and hailed a taxi. I did not go to the hotel. I did not go to the fancy dinner at the French bistro that I knew Richard could not afford. I went straight to the airport. I changed my flight to the next available one back to Chicago. As the plane took off, leaving Montreal and my son behind, I looked out the window. I felt a strange sense of peace. It was the peace of a man who finally realizes that the contract has been breached, and he is no longer obligated to finish the job. The job was done. Kendrick was a man now. He had his real father, Richard. Let Richard pay the bills. My phone began to buzz in my pocket as the plane reached cruising altitude. It was Kendrick. Then Francine. Then Kendrick again. I declined every call. I turned the phone off and ordered a whiskey from the flight attendant. I sipped it slowly, enjoying the burn. The graduation was over. The lesson, however, had just begun. And unlike the tuition I had paid for 4 years, this lesson was going to be free of charge, but the cost to Kendrick would be immeasurable. This was the first day of the rest of my life, the day I stopped being the invisible bank and started being the ghost that would haunt their financial reality. The burger at Saul's Diner costs exactly $5.50. It comes wrapped in wax paper that turns translucent from the grease, and it smells like grilled onions and honest work. It is the kind of meal I have eaten for 40 years. The kind of meal that fills you up without pretending to be something it is not. I sat in the corner booth away from the window watching the steam rise from my coffee. The diner was quiet, mostly filled with night shift workers getting ready to clock in and truck drivers passing through Chicago. There was no classical music playing here, only the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clatter of dishes from the kitchen. It was peace. It was reality. But 30 miles away in the downtown district, reality was crashing down on a table covered in white linen. My phone began to vibrate against the Formica tabletop, buzzing angrily like a trapped hornet. I looked at the screen. It was Kendrick. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I took a slow, deliberate bite of my burger, savoring the taste of the beef and the sharp tang of the mustard. I was in no rush. I had nowhere to be. The phone stopped ringing, then started again immediately. He was persistent. I will give him that. I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin and slid my finger across the screen, answering the call. I did not put the phone to my ear. Instead, I pressed the speaker button and set it down next to my plate. I wanted to hear him clearly, but I did not want his panic to touch me. "Bozeman, Dad, where are you?" Kendrick's voice was high-tight and laced with a fear he was trying desperately to disguise as anger. "You ruined everything today. You humiliated me in front of the dean, in front of everyone, and now you are not even answering your phone." I took a sip of coffee before speaking. My voice was calm, steady, deep. It was the voice of a man who was sitting on firm ground, talking to a man who was drowning. "I am eating dinner, Kendrick," I said simply. "A cheeseburger. You should try one sometime. It is good for the soul." "This is not funny, Dad," Kendrick hissed, and in the background I could hear the distinct murmur of a crowded restaurant and the clinking of silverware. I could hear the nervous laughter of his wife Meredith trying to smooth over an awkward silence. "Dad, we have a situation here. A technical situation. The restaurant system is down or something. They cannot process Richard's card. It is a glitch with his international accounts because most of his assets are in Switzerland. You know how these high-level banking systems are?" I almost laughed out loud. High-level banking systems. It was the oldest excuse in the book. The only thing Richard had in Switzerland was likely a fantasy, but I stayed silent, letting Kendrick fill the dead air with his desperation. "Dad, look, the bill is $5,000, Kendrick said, his voice dropping to a whisper so the guests would not hear. "We ordered the vintage champagne and the Wagyu beef. Everyone is waiting to leave. The manager is standing right here, looking at us. It is embarrassing, Dad. You need to transfer the money to me right now. Just cover it this one time to save face. I will pay you back as soon as my signing bonus comes in. Consider it an apology for the stunt you pulled at graduation." I looked at the grease stain on my paper napkin. "An apology. He wanted me to pay $5,000 as an apology for him ignoring me. He wanted the man he was ashamed of to save the man he was proud of. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it like bad milk. I leaned closer to the phone, Kendrick. I said slowly, "Listen to me very carefully. You stood on that stage today and you told the world that Richard was the man who made you. You said he invested in your future. You said he taught you the value of image and positioning. You chose him, Kendrick. You chose his version of the world. But Dad, this is an emergency," Kendrick pleaded, his voice cracking. "If Richard is the man who raised you up, then let him raise the funds for this dinner," I said. My voice did not waver. "Let him use that positioning. You admire so much. Tell him to elevate the credit limit on his card, the way he elevated you above your own father." "Dad, please do not do this." Kendrick sounded like a child, now stripped of his valedictorian arrogance. "I am not doing anything." "Kendrick, I am finishing my burger," I said, and then I reached out and pressed the red button ending the call. I did not turn the phone off this time. I just flipped it over, screen down on the table. I picked up my burger again, but I did not eat immediately. Instead, I closed my eyes and I let myself imagine the scene taking place at Le Montreux. I knew that restaurant. I had laid the foundation for the building it was in 20 years ago. I knew the marble floors and the crystal chandeliers, and I knew exactly how sound carried in that room. I could see Richard sweating in his rented linen suit, tapping his card on the table, blaming the waiter, blaming the machine, blaming the Wi-Fi connection. I could see the manager, a man in a stiff black suit, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, his face an impassive mask of polite judgment. He would not care about Swiss bank accounts. He only cared about the bottom line. I could see Meredith checking her phone, pretending to be busy, avoiding the eyes of the other guests, the guests who were likely the parents of other students. People Richard was trying to impress to get them to invest in his schemes. They would be shifting in their seats, checking their watches, realizing slowly that the free meal was not free after all. And then there was Francine, my ex-wife, the woman who had told me I lacked ambition because I preferred to save money rather than flaunt it. I knew exactly what she would do. She would try to charm the manager first, flashing that smile that used to work on me, but the manager would not budge. The bill had to be paid. Police would be mentioned. The word theft would hang in the air like cigar smoke. I imagined Francine's hand going to her neck, reaching for the diamond choker that sat there glittering under the lights. It was a beautiful piece, vintage platinum and diamonds. I knew it well because I was the one who bought it for her. It was our 20th anniversary gift, the year my business finally broke the $1 million mark. I had saved for 6 months to buy that necklace because she had seen it in a magazine and said it made a woman look like royalty. Now that necklace bought with my sweat and my love would be the only thing that could save them. She would have to unclasp it, her fingers trembling, while Richard looked away, too cowardly to watch. She would have to hand it over to the manager as collateral, or perhaps they would have to drive to a pawn shop nearby while the manager sent a guard to accompany them. The humiliation would be absolute. It would not be a private shame. It would be public, visceral, and undeniable. I took another bite of my burger. The meat was cold now, but it still tasted better than any filet mignon had ever eaten. This was not cruelty, I told myself. This was education. My son had spent 4 years studying economics, studying markets, studying the flow of capital. But he had missed the most basic lesson of all. You cannot spend what you do not have, and you cannot rely on a foundation built on sand. Richard was sand, I was rock. And tonight, Kendrick was learning that sand shifts when the tide comes in. The phone buzzed again. I ignored it. It buzzed a third time. I ignored it. They were drowning. And for the first time in his life, I was not going to throw a life preserver. I had thrown life preservers for 24 years. I had swam out and carried him on my back every time he got a cramp. And because of that, he never learned to tread water. He never learned that the ocean does not care who your stepfather is. I waved at the waitress, Betty, who had been working at Sal's since before Kendrick was born. She walked over with the coffee pot, refilling my mug without me asking. "You all right there?" Elsie asked, looking at the vibrating phone on the table. "You seem popular tonight." "Just spam calls, Betty," I said, smiling at her. "Just people trying to sell me things I do not need." She laughed, a warm, raspy sound. She wiped the table with a rag. "You tell them, L, we got everything we need right here." I pulled a $20 bill from my wallet. The bill for my meal was only $5.50. The rest was for her. Betty had 3 kids and a husband on disability. She never asked for help. She just worked double shifts and served coffee with a smile. She was worth 10. Richard's, she was worth 100. Meredith's, keep the change. Betty, I said, standing up and buttoning my flannel jacket. You sure, Elle? This is too much, she said, looking at the bill. It is value for service, Betty, I said, putting on my cap. It is an investment in the future. I walked out of the diner into the cool Chicago night. The air smelled of rain and asphalt. My truck was parked under a street lamp, looking old and battered next to a shiny new sedan, but my truck was paid for. My truck had an engine that would run for another 100,000 miles. My truck was mine. As I unlocked the door, I wondered if Francine was crying right now. I wondered if Kendrick was screaming at Richard, or if they were all sitting in the car in silence, driving home in disgrace. I felt a twinge of sadness, not for them, but for the time I had wasted trying to buy their love, trying to be the provider they wanted instead of the father they needed. I had spent so many years trying to prove I was successful enough for them. But tonight, I realized that my success was not the problem. Their definition of it was. I started the engine. It roared to life, a deep guttural sound that vibrated through the steering wheel. I backed out of the parking space and turned onto the main road heading home. Not to a penthouse, not to a mansion, but to a 3-bedroom house with a paid-off mortgage and a roof. I had shingled myself. I was going home to sleep. The sleep of the just while my son and his new family faced their first sleepless night of many. The bill of vanity is expensive, I thought, as I merged onto the highway. It charges interest. And tonight the first installment was due. I turned on the radio, letting the blues fill the cab of the truck, telling stories of heartache and redemption. I was just another character in the song now, but for the first time in a long time I was singing the chorus instead of just listening to the blues. I was the conductor of this train, and it was moving exactly where I wanted it to go. The rearview mirror was empty, the road ahead was clear, and I drove on, leaving the invisible man behind in the dust, ready to become something else entirely. Something they would not be able to ignore even if they tried. 1 month later, I stood in the lobby of a building called the Pinnacle. It was one of those glass towers in downtown Chicago that pierce the clouds like a needle. It was the kind of place where the air conditioner is set so cold you forget. It is summer outside and the doorman looks at your shoes before he looks at your face. I was wearing my best clean work boots and a fresh plaid button-down shirt, but I could feel the doorman tracking the invisible dust on my hem. He asked for my name 3 times before he finally let me up to the 42nd floor. The elevator ride was fast and silent, just like the rise of my son's ego. When the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway that smelled of lavender and money. Kendrick was waiting for me at the door of apartment 42B. He was not smiling. He looked like a man who was fulfilling an obligation, a man checking a box on a tedious to-do list. He was wearing a slim-fit navy suit even though it was a Saturday, and he held a glass of scotch in his hand, looking for all the world, like a young Richard. "Come in." "Dad," he said, stepping aside but not offering a hug. "Try not to touch the walls. We just had the painters touch up the trim." I walked inside. The apartment was breathtaking. I will admit that it had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. The floors were polished concrete and the furniture was all sharp angles and white leather. It looked like a museum exhibit, not a home. There were no photos of family. There were no books on the shelves, just decorative vases that looked like they cost more than my truck. Meredith emerged from the kitchen holding a glass of white wine. She was wearing a silk dress that shimmered in the afternoon light. She looked at me, and then her eyes darted immediately to my boots. "Oh, hi, Eldridge," she said. Her voice was light and airy, but it lacked any real warmth. "We are so glad you could make it to see our new sanctuary." "It is a nice place," I said, keeping my hands in my pockets. "It has good bones." Meredith laughed, a high tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, it is more than just bones. Eldridge, this is the lifestyle. This is what success looks like." I walked further into the living room, intending to sit down on the massive white sectional sofa that dominated the space. My knees were aching from a week of laying subfloor in a basement in the suburbs, and I just wanted to rest for a moment. But before I could lower myself, Meredith rushed forward, her hand raised like a traffic cop. "Oh, wait, Eldridge," she said, her eyes wide with mock panic. "Please do not sit there. That is Italian leather. We had it imported specifically for this room, And you know how denim can transfer dye. It stains terribly. Maybe you can sit on the bar stool instead. I froze halfway down and then straightened up slowly. I looked at the sofa, then at my jeans, which were washed so many times they were practically gray, then back at Meredith. She was smiling, but her eyes were cold, hard flint. She was telling me I was dirty. She was telling me I was contamination in her pristine world. I walked over to the kitchen island and sat on a hard metal stool. It was uncomfortable and cold against my back. Kendrick leaned against the counter, swirling his scotch, avoiding my eyes. "Look at that view, Dad," Meredith said, walking to the window and spreading her arms wide. "You can see the whole city from here." Kendrick and I were just saying how inspiring it is to look down on everything. It puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Only people with a true financial mindset like Kendrick and Uncle Richard act with this kind of vision. You have to be above the noise to lead the noise. I looked out the window, I saw the city, yes, but I did not see it the way she did. I saw the crane in the distance that I had operated in '89. I saw the brickwork on the library tower that my crew had restored in '95. I saw the sweat and the aching muscles and the frozen fingers that built the view she was so proud of. You know, Meredith, no? I said quietly. Building a house is different than just living in one. You have to understand the foundation before you worry about the view. Meredith sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. That is such an old-fashioned way of thinking, Eldridge. That is why you are still where you are and Kendrick is here. You labor with your hands. Kendrick labors with his mind. It is a different tax bracket for a reason. It is about leverage. She turned to grab a bottle of water from the fridge, and that is when I saw it. On the marble counter, amidst a pile of unopened mail, lay a thick document bound with a paperclip. It was the lease agreement. My instincts kicked in. The same instincts that told me when a retaining wall was about to buckle, or when a client was trying to stiff me on materials. I reached out and slid the document toward me. "What are you doing, Dad?" Kendrick asked, pushing off the counter. "I am reading the contract," I said, putting on my reading glasses. I flipped past the first page, past the flowery language about luxury amenities, and went straight to the terms and conditions section. I have read thousands of contracts in my life. I know where the bodies are buried. My eyes scanned the small print. Clause 14 subsection B, lease term, 24 months fixed. Clause 16, early termination fee, $20,000, plus the remaining balance of the lease. Acceleration clause. I looked up at Kendrick, taking off my glasses. "Son, did you read this before you signed it?" "Of course I read it," Kendrick said defensively. "It is a standard high-end lease." "Dad, it is not standard," I said, my voice firm. "It is predatory. You are locked in for 2 years at $4,000 a month. That is nearly $100,000 just in rent. And if you lose your job or need to move, this acceleration clause means you owe them the full amount immediately, usually within 30 days. Did you negotiate a break clause for employment termination?" Kendrick laughed, and it was an ugly, arrogant sound. "Lose my job, Dad. Just got the job. I am a vice president of strategy. I am making $120,000 a base salary plus bonuses. I am not some day laborer who gets laid off when it rains. This is corporate America. We have contracts. We have security." "And Richard advised you on this?" I asked, looking back at the paper. "Richard said it was a steal," Meredith interjected, coming to stand beside her husband, wrapping a possessive arm around his waist. "He said that living in a building like this is an investment in our personal brand," he said. "Clients need to see that we are successful before they trust us with their money." I stood up from the stool. The metal legs scraped against the polished floor, making a sound that made Meredith wince. I looked at the two of them standing there in their expensive clothes and their rented tower, drunk on an arrogance that they had not earned. They were children playing dress-up in a minefield. "You are spending 50% of your take-home pay on rent," I said, doing. The math allowed 50%. Kendrick, that leaves you no room for savings, no room for emergencies, and no room for error. If anything happens, if the wind shifts, you are going to fall, and it is a long way down from the 42nd floor. "Oh my God, stop it," Meredith snapped, slamming her wine glass down on the counter. "You are just jealous. Eldridge, admit it. You are jealous that your son has surpassed you at 24. You want him to live in some small, dark house like you do, saving every penny for a rainy day that never comes. Well, guess what? The sun is shining up here. I looked at Kendrick, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to tell her that my small, dark house was the reason he had food on the table for 2 decades. But he just looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Dad, you are killing the vibe," Kendrick said simply. "We invited you here to celebrate, not to have a lecture on fiscal responsibility from someone who drives a 15-year-old Ford. Look, I make more in a month. I make more than you probably make in a season. The world has changed. You do not need to worry about me. I have Richard's guidance now." I nodded slowly. I folded my glasses and put them back in my pocket. I felt a profound sadness settle over me. Not for myself, but for him. I saw the cliff he was driving toward, and I knew he had cut the brake lines because Richard told him it would make the car go faster. "Fine," I said. "I will not say another word. I just wanted to see where you were living. It is a beautiful view, Kendrick. Just remember that glass is fragile." I turned to the door. My heavy boots thudded softly against the concrete floor. I felt like an intruder in my own son's life. I reached for the handle, but before I could turn it, Kendrick called out, "Dad." I stopped and turned, hoping for a goodbye, hoping for a thank you for coming. "Make sure you wipe your feet on the mat outside before you get in the elevator," Kendrick said, pointing at my boots. "The building management is really strict about dirt in the lobby." I looked at him one last time. I looked at the boy I had carried on my shoulders, who I had taught to ride a bike, who I had sat up with when he had a fever. He was gone, replaced by this stranger in a navy suit who was worried about dust in a lobby. I did not wipe my feet. I walked out into the hallway and let the heavy door click shut behind me. I pressed the button for the elevator, and when I stepped inside, I looked at my reflection in the mirrored walls. I saw a man who was tired, but I also saw a man who was free. I owed no one. I owned everything I had. And as the elevator plummeted 42 floors down, returning me to the earth where I belonged, I knew that the crash was coming for them. It was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when, and when it happened, that acceleration clause was going to hit harder than any concrete floor I had ever poured. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Sterling Financial Tower, creating a blinding reflection that most people would squint at. But my son Kendrick walked right into it without blinking. He was wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than my first car, and his leather briefcase swung by his side in a rhythm of pure, unadulterated confidence. It was 8:45 in the morning on his first day of work, the day he believed his real life was finally beginning, the day he would step into the world of high finance that Richard had promised him, and leave the dusty world of manual labor far behind in his rearview mirror. I was not there in person. Of course, I was miles away fixing a leaky roof on a community center. But I know my son. I know exactly how he walks when he thinks he has won. I can imagine him approaching the security desk in the lobby. The guard, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a uniform that was slightly too tight, asked for his identification. Kendrick did not smile. He did not say good morning. He simply sighed. The sigh of a man who is already too important for procedural inconveniences, and flicked his ID badge onto the marble counter as if he were tossing a coin to a beggar. "I am the new Vice President of Strategy," Kendrick said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous lobby. "I am expected on the 45th floor. The guard picked up the badge, slowly checking the name against a list on his computer screen. He took his time. He did not like the tone, and in the working world, disrespect is a boomerang that always comes back around eventually. "I do not see you on the active access list, Mr. Hayes," the guard said, keeping his face neutral. "You will have to wait here while I call human resources." Kendrick laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Call them then, but tell them I am not accustomed to waiting in lobbies. My time is billable." He checked his watch, a heavy gold timepiece that was a graduation gift from Francine bought on credit. He tapped his foot on the polished floor, impatiently checking his reflection in the glass turnstile, fixing a tie that was already perfect. He was the picture of success, waiting for the world to catch up to him. He did not know that the world was about to run him over. 10 minutes later, a young assistant came down. She did not look like the welcoming committee Kendrick had expected. She looked nervous, clutching a clipboard to her chest. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly, "please follow me." Kendrick grabbed his briefcase and breezed past the security guard without a backward glance. "See you around," he muttered, sarcastic and cold. The elevator ride up was smooth and silent. The numbers on the display climbed higher and higher. 10, 20, 30, 40. Kendrick felt his ears pop. He felt the rush of elevation, the physical sensation of rising above the common people. He adjusted his cuffs, rehearsing his opening line for his new team. When the doors opened on the 45th floor, he stepped out, ready to be greeted by applause or at least a corner office with a view. Instead, the hallway was quiet, painfully quiet. The assistant did not lead him to the executive wing where the mahogany desks and leather chairs lived. She led him down a side corridor to a small, sterile conference room with frosted glass walls. There was no view here, just a round table and 3 empty chairs. "Wait here, please," she said, and closed the door, leaving him alone. Kendrick set his briefcase down on the table. He frowned. The air in the room was stale. It smelled of industrial cleaner and anxiety. He checked his watch again. It was 9:15. He should be in a strategy meeting by now. He should be meeting the CEO. Why was he in this holding cell? The door opened, and a woman walked in. She was not the hiring manager who had courted him over expensive lunches. She was older, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen 1,000 dreams crushed. She carried a single manila folder. She did not shake his hand. She did not offer him water. She sat down opposite him and opened the folder. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice lacking any inflection. "I am Barbara from Human Resources. We have a situation regarding your employment offer." Kendrick smiled, his charm switch flipping on automatically. "Barbara, nice to meet you. I assume there is some paperwork to finalize before I get my badge." The security downstairs was a bit of a nightmare. Barbara did not smile back. She looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "Mr. Hayes, over the weekend, Sterling Financial was acquired by a private equity firm from New York. As part of the acquisition terms, there has been an immediate restructuring of all non-essential departments. The strategy division has been dissolved, effective immediately." Kendrick blinked. He heard the words, but his brain refused to process them. "Dissolved?" He chuckled nervously. "I do not understand, Barbara. I was hired 2 weeks ago. I have my offer. Letter right here in my briefcase. I am the Vice President of Strategy Correction." Barbara said, flipping a page in her folder. "You were hired for a position that no longer exists. Your employment has been terminated before it began." The room suddenly felt very small. Kendrick stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Terminated? You cannot terminate me. I have not even logged into my computer yet. This is a mistake. Call the CEO. Call Richard Kavanaugh. He knows the board. He recommended me." "Mr. Kavanaugh has no standing here," Barbara said calmly. "And there is no mistake. We are cutting 20% of our workforce today. You are simply the first because you have no tenure and no severance package." "No tenure?" Kendrick's voice rose an octave, shaking with panic. "Listen to me. I moved here for this job. I signed a lease on a penthouse apartment 2 days ago, a 2-year lease at $4,000 a month. I bought a BMW on finance based on this salary. You cannot just tell me the job is gone. I have financial obligations." Barbara closed the folder. The sound was final, like a gavel hitting a block. "Mr. Hayes, I suggest you look at your offer letter, specifically paragraph 4, clause C. It states clearly that this is at-will employment. That means the company reserves the right to terminate the relationship at any time, for any reason, or for no reason at all, with or without notice. You have a master's in finance, do you not? You should understand what at-will means." Kendrick felt the blood drain from his face. At-will. It was a legal term he had studied in textbooks, a concept that applied to other people, to factory workers, to laborers like his father. It was not supposed to apply to him. He was talent. He was an asset. "But I have costs." Kendrick stammered, his arrogance evaporating, leaving only a scared boy in a suit meant for a man. "You have to pay me something, a signing bonus, a month of salary, anything. We owe you nothing, Mr. Hayes." Barbara said, standing up. "In fact, since you have not completed a single day of work, you are not even eligible for unemployment benefits. Security will escort you out of the building immediately. Please return your guest badge at the desk." She walked to the door and held it open. 2 security guards were already waiting in the hallway. Not the tired man from the lobby, but 2 large men with stone faces. They stepped forward, blocking the exit path, forcing Kendrick to grab his briefcase and walk between them. "This is insane," Kendrick muttered as they marched him to the elevator. "I will sue you. Do you hear me? I will sue this entire company. My lawyer will be in touch by noon." Barbara did not even look up from her clipboard as the elevator doors closed, shutting him out of the world he thought he owned. The ride down was fast. It felt like falling. The numbers on the display dropped 50, 40, 30. Kendrick leaned against the metal wall trying to catch his breath. His heart was hammering against his ribs. The penthouse, the car, the furniture, the credit cards. He had leveraged everything on the promise of that monthly paycheck. He was negative $5,000 a month before he even bought groceries. He stumbled out into the lobby. The guard at the desk looked up and saw Kendrick being escorted out by security. The guard did not say a word. He just went back to his computer, a faint smile playing on his lips. Kendrick pushed through the revolving doors and spilled out onto the sidewalk. The city noise hit him like a physical blow. Sirens, horns, the chatter of millions of people who had jobs, who had places to go. He stood there on the concrete, feeling the heat of the sun on his neck. It was not a spotlight anymore. It was an interrogation lamp. He reached into his pocket with trembling hands and pulled out his phone. He needed a lifeline. He needed the man who had set this all up, the man who had told him to lease the apartment, who had told him to buy the car, to look the part. He dialed Richard's number. He held the phone to his ear, pressing it hard against his head, blocking out the street noise. Ring, ring, ring. Come on, Richard, pick up. Richard, pick. Kendrick whispered, sweat dripping down his temple. Pick up, pick up, pick up. The ringing stopped and the automated voicemail clicked on. You have reached the private number of Richard Kavanaugh. I am currently traveling on business and will be unreachable. Please leave a message. Kendrick stared at the phone. Traveling on business. Richard was supposed to be in town having lunch with him today to celebrate the first day. The call ended. Kendrick dialed again. Straight to voicemail. He dialed Francine. She answered on the second ring. Mom. Kendrick gasped. Mom, they fired me. They fired me before I even started. What? Francine shrieked, her voice piercing through the speaker. That is impossible. Richard said that job was a lock. Where is Richard? Put him on the phone, I cannot reach him, Kendrick said, tears of frustration welling in his eyes. He is not answering, Mom. I am in trouble. I have the lease, the car. They said, I get nothing. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a long, heavy silence. Then, Francine spoke, and her voice was small, terrified. Kendrick, honey, Richard left the house early this morning. He took his passport. He said he had an urgent meeting in the Cayman Islands. I thought he was joking. Kendrick lowered the phone slowly. The street around him seemed to tilt. The skyscrapers looked like they were leaning in, ready to crush him. Richard was gone. The job was gone. And he was standing on the sidewalk in a $2,000 suit with a lease he could not break and a father he had disowned. He looked at his contact list. He scrolled past my name. Eldridge. He hovered over it for a second, his thumb trembling, but he could not do it. Not yet. The shame was too fresh. The arrogance was bruised but not broken. He put the phone back in his pocket and started walking. He did not know where he was going. He just knew he could not go back to the penthouse, and he certainly could not come to me. He was walking into a storm without an umbrella, and for the first time in his life he was realizing that the rain does not care how expensive your suit is. It soaks you to the bone just the same. And as he walked, disappearing into the crowd of strangers, he looked just like everyone else, invisible, desperate, and alone. Kendrick ran 3 blocks to the offices of Kavanaugh Wealth Management. His expensive Italian leather shoes slapped against the hot pavement, and sweat stained the armpits of his $2,000 suit. He was not running for exercise. He was running for his life. He needed Richard. He needed the man who had the answers, the man who knew how to manipulate the system. He needed the father figure who had promised him that the rules of ordinary men did not apply to the elite. The office was located in a boutique building in the financial district, a place with marble columns and gold lettering on the glass doors. It was the kind of building designed to make people feel safe, designed to whisper old money and stability. But as Kendrick turned the corner, his lungs burning and his heart hammering against his ribs, the whisper turned into a scream. There were no luxury sedans parked out front, There were 3 black SUVs with government plates and 2 police cruisers with their lights flashing, silently reflecting blue and red off the windows of the skyscrapers. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, people holding phones up filming the spectacle. Secretaries from nearby buildings whispering behind their hands. Kendrick stopped dead in his tracks, his chest heaving. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach, a sensation of dread that was heavier than the humid Chicago air. Yellow tape was stretched across the entrance. The revolving door was stopped jammed by a police officer standing guard. Kendrick pushed through the crowd using his elbows, ignoring the protests of the people he shoved aside. He had to get in. He had to warn Richard. He had to fix this. He ducked under the yellow tape before the officer could stop him. "Hey, you cannot go in there," the officer shouted, stepping forward, his hand resting on his holster. "I work here," Kendrick yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "I am family. My father is inside. That is Richard Kavanaugh's office." The officer grabbed Kendrick by the arm, his grip like a vice. He did not look impressed. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had spent all morning dealing with white-collar criminals who thought they were above the law. "If Richard Kavanaugh is your father, then you definitely do not want to go in there," the officer said, pulling Kendrick back to the sidewalk. "Stay behind the line, kid. Let me go." Kendrick struggled, his arrogance flaring up one last time. "You do not understand who we are. We have lawyers. We know the mayor. You are making a mistake." Before the officer could respond, the glass doors opened. 2 agents wearing windbreakers with FBI printed in bold yellow letters on the back stepped out. Between them was Richard. Kendrick gasped. The man he saw was not the golden god of finance who had toasted him at graduation. It was a small, deflated man wearing a wrinkled linen suit that looked 2 sizes too big. The famous Kavanaugh tan looked orange and patchy under the harsh sunlight. His hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was a mess falling over, his forehead giving him the look of a frightened animal. And on his wrists, the wrists that usually wore a Rolex and gold cufflinks, were shiny steel handcuffs. Richard Kendrick screamed the name tearing from his throat. "Richard, tell them. This is a misunderstanding, right?" Richard looked up. He saw Kendrick standing there, held back by the police officer. For a second, Kendrick expected reassurance. He expected Richard to wink to say it was all part of a master plan, a misunderstanding that would be cleared up over lunch. But Richard's eyes were wild. Terrified Kendrick, Richard shouted, struggling against the agents. "Get the laptop, the one in the safe. Do not let them find the laptop. Call Sylvia. Call anyone. Just get me out of here. Shut your mouth." Kavanaugh, one of the agents, snapped, pushing Richard's head down as they moved him toward the back of a black SUV. But Richard did not shut up. He twisted his body, looking back at Kendrick. Desperation etched into every line of his face. It was not concern for Kendrick. It was self-preservation. "The Cayman accounts," Richard yelled, spit flying from his mouth. "Use your signature. The codes are in your name. Kendrick, transfer everything before they freeze it. Do it now." The agent shoved Richard into the car and slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot, final and deafening. Kendrick stood frozen on the sidewalk, the words ringing in his ears. "Use your signature. The codes are in your name." What was he talking about? What Cayman accounts? The crowd was buzzing now, smartphones recording every second of the humiliation. Kendrick felt the eyes of strangers on him, dissecting him, linking him to the man in handcuffs. He wanted to run. He wanted to disappear. But before he could move, a man in a cheap gray suit walked out of the building. He was holding a clipboard and he walked straight toward Kendrick as if guided by radar. "Are you Kendrick Hayes?" the man asked. His voice was flat, professional, devoid of emotion. Kendrick swallowed hard. He looked at the police. The officer then at the man. "Yes, I am Kendrick Hayes. Why?" The man nodded and pulled a thick envelope from his clipboard. He thrust it toward Kendrick's chest. "You are being served. Mr. Hayes, this is a subpoena to appear before a federal grand jury regarding the investigation into Kavanaugh Wealth Management and its subsidiaries." Subpoena. Kendrick took the envelope, his hands trembling so badly he almost dropped it. "I do not understand. I just graduated. I do not work for Richard. I work for Sterling Financial, or I did until this morning." The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That is not what the paperwork says, Mr. Hayes. According to the documents seized this morning, You are the listed director and sole signatory of KH Consulting, strictly a shell company registered in Delaware 3 years ago. Kendrick felt the world spin. 3 years ago, he was a sophomore in college. He remembered Richard coming to his dorm room with a bottle of champagne and a stack of papers saying it was for an educational trust. Fund a way to save on taxes for his tuition, Richard had said. Sign here and here. Boy, it is just a formality to secure your future. Kendrick had signed. He had felt important. He had felt like an adult making business deals. I signed something for tuition, Kendrick whispered, the blood draining from his face. It was for my trust fund. It was for a tax shelter used to launder money from investors, the man said plainly. And according to the IRS, that company, KH Consulting, has failed to pay payroll taxes for the last 8 quarters. You currently owe the federal government approximately $50,000 in back taxes, plus penalties. And that is before the investors start suing you personally for the funds that flowed through your accounts. $50,000. Kendrick repeated the number, choking him. He looked at the black SUV driving away, carrying the man he had idolized, the man he had thanked on stage, the man he had honored instead of me. Richard told me he was paying for my school. Kendrick stammered, tears stinging his eyes. He said he was investing in me. He was investing in a scapegoat, the man said, turning to walk away. You might want to find a lawyer, Mr. Hayes. A real one. Not whoever your stepfather uses. Good luck. You are going to need it. Kendrick stood alone on the sidewalk. The crowd began to disperse. The show was over. The circus had left town, leaving behind only the clown. Kendrick looked down at the envelope in his hands. It was heavy, terrifyingly heavy. Inside were papers that proved he was not a prodigy. He was a patsy. He realized with a sick clarity that Richard had never paid a dime of his own money for Kendrick's education. He had used Kendrick's name to open credit lines to create fake companies to hide debt. Richard had not raised him up. Richard had built a house of cards on Kendrick's back, and now the wind had blown. Kendrick looked at his reflection in the glass of the building. The Navy suit suddenly felt like a costume. The briefcase felt like a prop. He was 24 years old. He had no job. He had a lease. He could not pay, and now he owed the federal government $50,000 because he had trusted a man who told him what he wanted to hear instead of a man who told him the truth. He thought of me then. He thought of Eldridge Hayes, the man with the calloused hands and the silent demeanor. He thought of the checks I had written, the ones drawn on a real bank account backed by real labor. He thought of how I had warned him about reading the fine print, about understanding the foundation. He wanted to scream. He wanted to throw the subpoena into the gutter and run away. But there was nowhere to run. The law has long arms, and debt has a way of finding you no matter where you hide. He sat down on the curb, ignoring the dirt that would stain his trousers. He put his head in his hands. The city of Chicago towered over him, indifferent and cold. He was not a master of the universe. He was not a vice president. He was just a boy who had been played. For a fool. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Meredith asking if he had fixed the credit card issue, asking if they could still go shopping for curtains later. He laughed, a broken, sobbing sound. Shopping. She had no idea. She was waiting for a golden goose, and he was coming home as a plucked chicken. He stood up slowly, his legs feeling like lead. He had to tell her. He had to tell someone. But as he looked at the contacts in his phone, he realized he had burned the only bridge that could support this kind of weight. He had walked out on the only man who would have read that contract for him. Richard was gone, taken by the FBI. Francine was likely at home hyperventilating about her social status, and Kendrick was left holding the bag. The investment was complete, and the return was absolute ruin. He started walking toward the subway station because he knew without looking that his credit cards, the ones Richard had set up for him, were already dead, just like his dreams. The sound of metal sliding against a whetstone is a specific kind of rhythm. It is a sound I have known for 50 years. A scrape, a pause, and a scrape. Again. It is the sound of preparation. It is the sound of a man taking a dull, useless edge and turning it into something sharp, something capable of doing work. I was in my garage, standing at the workbench under the single bulb that hummed with a low yellow light. Outside, the sky was dark and threatening rain. The kind of heavy Midwest storm that turns the sky green before it breaks. Inside, it was just me and my tools. I was cleaning my favorite trowel, a Marshalltown brick trowel, with a leather handle worn smooth by the grip of my palm. This tool had laid the bricks for the library downtown. It had spread the mortar for the hospital wing where Kendrick was born. It was not just a piece of metal. It was an extension of my arm. I heard the car before I saw it. It was not the confident roar of the luxury sedan Kendrick had leased just weeks ago. It was the desperate whining engine of an Uber, a car that had clearly seen too many miles. The doors slammed shut, not with authority, but with panic. Then came the footsteps, heavy and hurried, crunching on the gravel driveway. I did not look up. I kept my rhythm. Scrape, pause, scrape. I knew who it was. Desperation has a very specific walk. The side door of the garage burst open, letting in a gust of humid wind. Kendrick and Meredith stood there framed by the stormy night. They looked like ghosts of the people I had seen at the penthouse just a week ago. Kendrick's suit was wrinkled as if he had slept in it. Meredith's hair, usually sprayed into perfect submission, was loose and frizzy. Her makeup smudged around her eyes, giving her the look of a raccoon caught in a trash can. They were breathing hard, eyes darting around my garage, looking at the shelves of paint cans, the stacks of lumber, the orderly rows of tools as if they were seeing them for the first time. They did not say hello, they did not ask how I was. They did not apologize for the insults at the graduation or the humiliation at the penthouse. They bypassed common decency entirely and went straight to the demand. "Dad, thank God you are home," Kendrick said, his voice cracking. He stepped forward, almost tripping over a coil of extension cord. "We have a crisis, a major crisis. Richard has been arrested. The FBI seized everything. The accounts are frozen, Dad. They are talking about jail time for tax evasion. They are saying I am liable for $50,000 plus legal fees. I did not stop sharpening the trowel. I focused on the edge, watching the metal shine under the light. Scrape, pause, scrape." I said nothing. Meredith pushed past Kendrick, stepping into my personal space. She smelled of stale perfume and fear. "Listen to us, Eldridge. This is not the time for your silent treatment. We need liquid cash, and we need it now. The lawyers want a retainer just to look at the case, and the IRS is already sending letters. We have figured out a solution, a solution." I repeated calmly, keeping my eyes on the blade. I finally looked up at them. "You figured out a solution for a problem you created. That is a first. Do not be sarcastic." Meredith snapped, her hands shaking. "It is simple, Eldridge. We checked the property values in this neighborhood. This house, your house sits on a double lot. The market is hot right now, even for an old place like this. We need you to take out a home equity line of credit, or better yet, a reverse mortgage. We can get maybe $200,000 out of this place by Friday. That covers the tax debt, pays the lawyers, and leaves us a cushion to survive until Kendrick gets a new job." I stopped moving the trowel. The silence in the garage was sudden and absolute. I looked at the two of them standing there proposing that I sell the roof over my head to pay for their vanity. It was not a request. It was an instruction. "You want me to mortgage my home?" I asked, my voice low and level. "It is the only asset we have access to," Kendrick said, pleading. "Now, Dad, come on. You are one man living in a 3-bedroom house. It is ridiculous. You do not need all this space. The heating bills alone must be a waste. You can downgrade, get a small condo, or move into a senior living facility. We saw a brochure for one nearby." "It is nice, Dad. They have activities." "Activities." I chuckled, a dry, soundless laugh. "You think I need activities, Kendrick? My activity is living in the house I built with my own 2 hands. Meredith rolled her eyes, a gesture of pure impatience. "Oh, please, spare us the sentimental speech, Eldridge. It is just wood and brick. It is an asset meant to be leveraged. This is an emergency. Kendrick is your son. If he goes to prison, his career is over. His life is over. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason your son fails because you were holding on to a dusty old house?" I looked around the garage. I looked at the rafters where I had carved my initials and Francine's initials back in 1982. I looked at the workbench, which was made from the leftover timber of the first big contract I ever won. This house was not an asset. It was a timeline of my life. Every scratch on the floor, every layer of paint on the walls held a memory. I had paid off the mortgage 15 years ago specifically, so I would never have to answer to a bank again, and now they wanted to drag me back into debt. I set the trowel down on the bench. The metal clinked against the wood. "This house is not an asset," I said, my voice rising slightly for the first time. It is 40 years of sweat. It is 40 years of waking up at 5 in the morning and coming home with cement dust in my lungs. It is the reason you ate, Kendrick. It is the reason you had clothes on your back. This house is the physical proof that I worked while others played. And you want me to give it to the bank to pay for a mess you made because you were too lazy to read a contract and too greedy to ask questions. It is not greed, it is finance, Kendrick shouted, his face turning red. You do not understand how the world works. Dad, you use leverage to get out of trouble. We will pay you back. When I get back on my feet, when I get a new position, we will pay off the loan. You will not even notice. You will pay me back, I asked, looking him dead in the eye. Like you paid me back for college. Like you paid me back for the car. I bought you when you turned 16. You have never paid anyone back in your life, Kendrick. You take. That is what you do. You consume. That is unfair, Meredith screamed, slamming her hand on the workbench, startling a spider that was crawling near the vise. We are offering you a chance to be useful, Eldridge. For once in your life, you can actually help your son instead of just judging him. But no, you would rather hoard this pile of bricks. You are selfish, that is what you are. You are a selfish, bitter old man who wants to see us fail, so you can say, I told you so. I picked up the trowel again. I tested the edge with my thumb. It was sharp, razor sharp. Get out, I said softly. What? Meredith asked, blinking. I pointed the trowel at the door. Get out of my garage, get out of my house. Do not come back until you learn the value of $1 and the value of respect. Dad, please, Kendrick stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. They are going to ruin me. You ruined yourself, I said, turning my back on them and returning to the whetstone. Scrape, pause, scrape. The rhythm returned, comforting and final. I heard them huff in frustration. I heard the shuffling of their feet as they turned to leave. They walked out into the rain, the storm finally breaking overhead, thunder rumbling in the distance like a gavel coming down. As the door was closing just before the latch clicked shut, I heard Meredith's voice, barely a whisper, but carried by the wind clearly to my ears. Selfish old bastard, she muttered to Kendrick. He is going to die soon anyway, and he cannot take it with him. We will get it all, eventually. We just have to wait. The door clicked shut. I stopped, sharpening. The garage was quiet again, save for the drumming of rain on the metal roof. I stood there staring at the sparks that had flown from the metal. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. She was right about one thing. I could not take it with me when I died, but she was wrong about the rest. She thought she just had to wait. She thought inheritance was a law of nature, inevitable and guaranteed. She did not know that I could rewrite the laws. I reached for my phone, which was sitting on a shelf covered in a fine layer of sawdust. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It was not a family member. It was not a friend. It was Sylvia Ross, my attorney. Sylvia answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and professional, even at this hour. Eldridge, she said, is everything all right? Everything is clear, Sylvia, I said, looking at the trowel, looking at the house that was built on. Sweat and love. Not everything needs to be preserved. Some things need to be restructured. I need to make an amendment to my will, and Sylvia, I need to liquidate the trust fund entirely. Tonight, she asked, surprised. Tonight, I said. Tomorrow morning, I am going shopping. I have some investing to do. And it is not going to be in family. I hung up the phone and turned off the light. The garage plunged into darkness, but for the first time in a long time I saw the path forward with absolute clarity. They wanted my assets. They wanted the fruit of my labor without the labor. Well, they were about to learn that when you chop down the tree to get the fruit, you end up with nothing but wood chips, and I was done being the tree. I was not there in the room when the betrayal happened, but I know the players on that stage so well that I can recite their lines before they speak them. I can close my eyes and see the scene unfold with crystal clarity. It would have been at Francine's house, a sprawling colonial estate that Richard had bought with other people's money. It was a house filled with white furniture that you were afraid to sit on, and art that was bought by the square foot. Rather than for its beauty, Kendrick and Meredith had fled there after leaving my garage, seeking shelter from the storm and from the truth. They were sitting in Francine's living room, huddled together like shipwreck survivors washed up on a beach of expensive Persian rugs. Kendrick was likely pacing the length of the room, his hands running through his hair, his mind racing with the image of federal agents and tax liens. Meredith would have been on the sofa nursing a glass of Francine's best vodka, her mascara running down her cheeks, her mind calculating the damage to her reputation. My ex-wife Francine was there too. Frantic and terrified, she had just watched her husband being dragged away in handcuffs, and now she was watching her son unravel. She was a woman who had spent her entire life running away from discomfort, running away from the reality that money is finite. She looked at Kendrick, her golden boy, and saw him crumbling. He was talking about jail. He was talking about ruin. He was crying. The ugly tears of a child who has broken a toy he cannot fix. "We are finished, Mom," Kendrick sobbed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I owe $50,000. The IRS does not negotiate. Richard used my name. Mom, he used me as a shield. And now I am going to prison." Francine fluttered around him, her silk robe trailing behind her like the wings of a nervous moth. "Don't say that, Kenny," she pleaded. "There has to be a way. Richard always had a plan. Maybe it is just a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Meredith snapped, looking up from her drink. "Richard is a crook, and because of him we are homeless and destitute. We went to Eldridge. We begged him for help, expecting him to have a shred of decency, but he threw us out. He told us to get out of his garage. He would rather see his son rot in a cell than part with his precious house." Francine stopped pacing. Her eyes went wide. She looked at Kendrick and then at the antique desk in the corner where she kept her important papers. A memory surfaced through the fog of her panic. A memory from 20 years ago when I was still the man she was married to, when I was the one paying the bills and securing the future. "Wait," she whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "Wait a minute. Eldridge isn't broke. He isn't just sitting on that house." "What are you talking about?" Meredith asked, her eyes narrowing. Francine rushed to the desk, tearing open drawers, tossing aside unpaid bills and invitation cards for charity galas she could no longer afford. She was digging frantically, looking for a file that had gathered dust for 2 decades. "I remember signing something," she muttered almost to herself. "It was when Kendrick was 5 years old. Eldridge was obsessed with the future. He was making good money, then really good money from the stadium contract. He insisted on setting something aside." Kendrick stopped crying. He watched his mother with a mix of confusion and desperate hope. "What are you looking for?" "Mom." Francine pulled out a faded manila folder. It was thin, but the label on it was typed in bold black letters, "The Kendrick Education Trust." She opened it, her hands trembling as she scanned the document inside. "Here it is," she gasped, turning to face them. "I knew I wasn't crazy. Eldridge set up a trust fund for you. He put in a lump sum of $50,000 back in 1998. He said it was to grow with compound interest until you were ready to build your life." Kendrick snatched the folder from her hands. He stared at the numbers. He stared at the projection chart attached to the back. The initial deposit was $50,000, but with 20 years of aggressive market growth, the estimated value at the bottom of the page was staggering. It was nearly $150,000. $150,000. Kendrick whispered the number, rolling off his tongue like a prayer. He looked up at Meredith, and I can imagine the look in his eyes. It was the look of a starving man spotting a banquet. "He has this money?" Meredith asked, standing up slowly, the vodka glass forgotten on the table. "He has had this money the entire time." Francine nodded, looking at the date on the paper. "He never touched it. He told me once that this was untouchable, that it was the foundation for Kendrick's empire. But we got divorced and Richard came along, and I just forgot about it. I assumed maybe he spent it. But here is the annual statement from last year. It is still active. The account is with a private brokerage." Kendrick's shock turned instantly into rage. It was a transformation that only the entitled can manage. He did not feel gratitude that his father had saved for him. He felt betrayed that he had not been given it sooner. He slammed the folder down on the coffee table, his face twisting into a scowl. "He knew," Kendrick shouted. "He knew. He had this money sitting there, earning interest while I was standing in his garage begging for a loan. He watched me cry. Mom, he watched me humiliate myself, asking him to mortgage his house when he had this sitting in a bank account. In my name. He is a monster," Meredith hissed, her survival instincts kicking into overdrive. She walked over to the table and picked up the document, reading the fine print like a vulture picking at a carcass. "Look at this, Kendrick. It says Kendrick Hayes, Trust. It has your name on it. It belongs to you. He is just the trustee. He is the custodian. This is your money, and he is holding it hostage." "Why didn't he give it to me when I graduated?" Kendrick asked, pacing again, but this time with the energy of anger instead of fear. "Why didn't he give it to me when I got the job? He let me go into debt. He let me rely on Richard, knowing Richard was a fraud. He wanted this to happen. He wanted to see me fail." "It is control," Francine said, shaking her head sadly. "Eldridge always wanted control. He hated that you looked up to Richard. He hated that you wanted a life bigger than his dusty construction sites. He is punishing you, Kenny. He is punishing you for being successful. Successful." The word hung in the air, a bitter joke considering their current reality. But in their minds, they were still successful people, temporarily embarrassed by circumstances. "He cannot do this," Meredith said, her voice hard and cold. She pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen, searching for legal precedents, searching for aggressive lawyers. "This is theft, Kendrick. If he is withholding trust assets that belong to the beneficiary, especially when the beneficiary is in financial distress, that is a breach of fiduciary duty. We can sue him. Sue him." Francine looked worried. "Eldridge can be stubborn. You know that." "We don't just sue him," Meredith said, looking up with a shark-like grin. "We destroy him. We take the money and we sue him for damages, for emotional distress, for the interest lost because he didn't disburse it sooner. This is $150,000, Francine. That pays off the tax debt. It pays the lawyers for Richard. It pays our rent. It saves us." Kendrick looked at the folder again. He looked at my signature at the bottom of the page, a strong, steady signature written in blue ink. It was the signature of a man who loved his son enough to sacrifice $50,000 in 1998, a fortune back then, just to ensure his boy would never struggle. And yet all Kendrick saw was a weapon. He watched me beg. Kendrick repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He stood there sharpening his tools, acting like a poor martyr while he was sitting on my fortune. He laughed at us, Meredith. He told us to get out. He enjoyed it. He is jealous of you, Meredith reinforced, stepping close to him, putting her hands on his shoulders. He knows you are better than him. He knows you have a future and he has nothing but a past. He is trying to sabotage you, but we won't let him. This is the answer, Kendrick. This is the miracle we needed. Kendrick nodded slowly. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. He picked up the phone. He did not dial my number. He did not call to ask for an explanation or to say thank you for the savings. He called a number Meredith had found on Google, a lawyer who specialized in family disputes and asset recovery. "Hello," Kendrick said into the phone, his voice regaining that arrogant tilt. "I need to speak to someone about a lawsuit. I am being defrauded by a trustee. My father is withholding assets that belong to me. I want to file an emergency motion. I was sitting at home in my kitchen drinking a cup of tea, listening to the rain fall on the roof, unaware that the money I had saved with love was now being forged into a blade to stab me in the back. They did not see a father. They saw a bank vault. And they had just decided that if they couldn't find the combination, they were going to use dynamite. They did not know that the dynamite was going to blow up in their faces. They did not know that a trust fund is not just a pile of cash, it is a contract. And contracts, as I had tried to tell them, have terms and conditions. Back in Francine's living room, they toasted with the expensive vodka, celebrating their discovery, convinced they had found the golden ticket. They laughed, imagining the look on my face when the lawsuit hit, imagining me scrambling to write them a check. They felt smart. They felt powerful. They had no idea that they had just declared war on the one man who actually knew how to win a fight. The morning sun has a way of revealing the truth about a house. It shows you where the paint is peeling and where the wood is strong. I was sitting on my front porch at 7 in the morning with a mug of black coffee in my hand, watching the light hit the oak tree. I planted 30 years ago. It was a Tuesday. The neighborhood was quiet, just the sound of birds and the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. It was the kind of peace that a man works his whole life to earn, the kind of peace that usually signals a storm is coming. I saw the mail carrier turn the corner. It was Carl. a man I have known since his knees were good and his hair was black. He walked up my driveway with a heavy step carrying a bundle of letters. But today he did not wave. He did not smile. He looked at the envelope in his hand and then he looked at me with an expression that sat somewhere between pity and embarrassment. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," Carl said, walking up the steps. He held out a thick white envelope. It was not the usual utility bill or a flyer for a pizza place. It was certified mail, the kind you have to sign for, the kind that means someone is trying to make sure you cannot say you didn't know what was coming. I set my coffee down on the railing and took the pen from him. My hand was steady. I signed my name, Eldridge Hayes, on the little green card. The ink was barely dry before Carl nodded and walked away quickly, as if he wanted to put as much distance as possible between himself and whatever bad news he had just delivered. I sat back down in my rocking chair. The envelope was heavy. It was expensive, stationery, thick, and textured. In the top left corner, in bold, aggressive lettering, it read, "The Law Offices of Steinberg and Thorne." Immediate action required. I did not open it immediately. I took a sip of my coffee. The steam warmed my face. I looked at the oak tree again. I remembered the day Kendrick helped me rake the leaves under that tree. He was 10 years old, complaining about blisters on his soft hands, asking why we couldn't just hire someone like the neighbors. I told him then that labor is how you learn the value of the land. He didn't understand it then, and holding this letter, I knew he didn't understand it. Now I slid my finger under the flap of the envelope and tore it open neatly inside. There were 10 pages of legal documents. The language was cold, precise, and designed to intimidate. It was the language of war. The Kendrick Hayes Trust. Demand for accounting and immediate disbursement. I began to read. The letter accused me of everything short of murder. It stated that I, Eldridge Hayes, acting as trustee, had willfully and maliciously withheld assets belonging to the beneficiary Kendrick Hayes. It claimed that I had breached my fiduciary duty. It claimed that I had caused emotional distress and financial hardship. It demanded the immediate release of $150,000 plus accrued interest within 48 hours, or else they would file a civil suit for misappropriation of funds, or else they would seek punitive damages, or else they would drag my name through the mud of the court system, proving that I was a bitter old man stealing from his own son. I read the words, misappropriation of assets, out loud. The phrase tasted like ash in my mouth. Misappropriation meant stealing. It meant using something that wasn't yours for your own gain. I thought about the $50,000 I had saved in '98. I thought about the overtime, the missed holidays, the weekends spent wiring houses while other fathers watched football. I had saved that money so he would never have to know the panic of an empty bank account. And now he was accusing me of stealing it because I wouldn't let him use it to clean up a mess he made with a con artist. A younger version of me might have been angry. I might have torn the letter up and driven over to Francine's house to scream at them. But I am not young anymore, and I have learned that anger is a waste of energy. When you have a strategy, anger is for people who are surprised. I was not surprised. I had expected this. The moment Meredith found out about the money, I knew the sharks would circle. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I finished my coffee down to the dregs. Then I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number that was programmed under speed dial. It was not a family member. It was Sylvia Ross. Sylvia is the best trust and estate lawyer in Chicago. She is a black woman who fought her way up from the South Side, and she has a mind like a steel trap. She answered on the first ring. "Good morning, Eldridge," she said. Her voice was calm, professional. She knew why I was calling. They took the bait. "Sylvia," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I just got a certified letter from a firm called Steinberg and Thorne. They are demanding the trust fund. They are threatening to sue for misappropriation." Sylvia laughed a low, confident sound. "Steinberg and Thorne." She said, "I know them. They are ambulance chasers." "Eldridge. They specialize in quick settlements and intimidation. They are not litigators. They are bullies. Well, these bullies want $150,000 by Thursday," I said, "or they are going to take me to court." "Let them," Sylvia said. Her tone shifted, becoming sharper. "Let them file the motion." "Eldridge, we have been waiting for this. This is exactly what we needed to trigger the final clause of the trust document. Did they accuse you of malice?" "Yes," I said, looking at the letter. "They called it willful and malicious withholding." "Perfect," Sylvia said. If they claim malice, we get to present evidence of character. We get to present the history of the relationship. We get to show why the trustee made the decision to withhold Eldridge. It is time I knew what she meant. It was time to stop protecting him. It was time to stop being the safety net that caught him every time he fell. It was time to let him hit the ground. "Prepare the education file," I said. The words felt heavy. "But right, the education file," Sylvia repeated. "You are sure you want to release the full history?" "I am sure," I said. "They want to talk about investments. Let us show them the return on investment I have gotten for 24 years. Prepare the file, Sylvia, and schedule a meeting with their lawyers. Tell them I will not disperse a dime until we meet face to face on my turf or yours." "I will set it up for Friday," Sylvia said. "Stay calm, Eldridge. Do not talk to them. Do not answer their calls. Let everything go through me." I hung up the phone. The sun was higher now, burning off the morning dew. The day was getting hot. I stood up and stretched, feeling the stiffness in my back. The letter was sitting on the table, a declaration of war from my own flesh and blood. It should have broken my heart, but my heart had already broken at the graduation ceremony. Now there was only resolve. I walked into the garage and pulled out my lawnmower. It is an old John Deere, a reliable machine that I have kept running with my own hands for 15 years. I checked the oil. I filled the gas tank. I primed the engine. I pulled the cord and it roared to life, a loud mechanical growl that drowned out the birds and the traffic and the thoughts in my head. I pushed the mower out onto the lawn. The smell of cut grass filled the air, fresh and green. It is a smell I love. It is the smell of order. I started walking back and forth in straight lines, creating a pattern on the chaotic growth of the yard. Back and forth. Back and forth. It is simple work. Honest work. You push the machine and the grass gets cut. You put in the effort and you see the result. As I mowed, I could feel my phone vibrating in my pocket. It buzzed against my thigh, persistent and angry. I knew who it was. It was Meredith, or maybe Kendrick, or maybe their cheap lawyer trying to scare me into paying before the deadline. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I did not stop pushing the mower. I did not check the screen. I let it ring. I let them scream into the void. They wanted my attention. They wanted my fear. They wanted my money, but all they were going to get was the voicemail. I thought about the education file that Sylvia was pulling from her safe. It was a thick folder. It contained more than just financial statements. It contained police reports from when Kendrick was 16 and got caught shoplifting a charge I made disappear. It contained the emails from his professors about his plagiarism, a situation I smoothed over. It contained the bills for the car accidents he caused, the debts I paid quietly. So many times I had covered for him cleaning up his mess so he could keep his pristine image. They accused me of misappropriation. They had no idea that the only thing I had misappropriated was justice. I had stolen the consequences from him for his entire life. I had protected him from the results of his own actions. And that was my sin. That was my failure. But not anymore. I turned the mower at the edge of the lawn, lining up the next row. The vibration of the handle numbed my hands, but it felt good. It felt like I was finally doing something real. I looked at the house, my house standing strong against the blue sky. They wanted to take it from me. They wanted to leverage my sweat for their survival, but they forgot that I am the one who built the walls. I am the one who poured the foundation. Let the phone ring. I thought, pushing the mower forward into the tall grass. Let them threaten. Let them sue. They were about to learn that you cannot sue a man for being a father, and you certainly cannot win a war against a man who has kept the receipts for 24 years. The grass flew out the side of the mower, a green spray of debris clearing the path. I was cleaning up my yard, and soon, very soon, I would clean up my life. The elevator ride to Sylvia Ross's office was a journey into a world that Kendrick pretended to belong to, but that I actually owned a piece of. I stood in the back of the car, watching the numbers climb. I was wearing a fresh flannel shirt and my good dark denim jeans, the kind I usually saved for church. My boots were polished, but they were still work boots. I did not dress up for this. I did not put on a costume. I wanted them to see exactly who they were fighting. I wanted them to see the laborer, because they had forgotten that laborers are the ones who build the prisons. Sylvia's office is on the top floor of a building that makes the pinnacle look like a toy set. It is a space designed to intimidate. The floors are marble. The walls are lined with mahogany that smells of old money and lemon polish, and the conference room has a table long enough to land a small plane on. I sat at the head of that table with Sylvia to my right. Sylvia did not look like a lawyer today. She looked like a general. She was wearing a sharp white suit, and her tablet was placed precisely parallel to the edge of the table. She did not speak. She just tapped her finger rhythmically on the glass surface, waiting. When the door opened, the air in the room changed. It soured. In walked Mr. Thorne, the lawyer Kendrick had hired. He was a short man with a comb-over that was fighting a losing battle against gravity and a suit that was too shiny under the fluorescent lights. He carried a briefcase that looked like it was made of cardboard covered in fake leather. Behind him came Kendrick and Meredith. They looked like they hadn't slept in 3 days. Kendrick's eyes were bloodshot, and Meredith was chewing on a fingernail, the polish chipped and ragged. They walked in with their chins up, trying to project confidence, but I could smell the fear on them. It smelled like stale sweat and cheap cologne. Mr. Thorne did not offer to shake hands. He marched to the other end of the table and slammed his briefcase down. The latch popped, open with a loud click that echoed in the silent room. He pulled out a stack of papers and spread them out like he was laying down a royal flush. "Let us not waste time," he barked, his voice loud and grating. "We all know why we are here. My client, Mr. Kendrick Hayes, has been the victim of a gross violation of trust. We are here to rectify that immediately." Sylvia did not blink. She did not look at the papers. She looked at Thorne with the same expression. I use when I find a termite in a support beam. Mild annoyance mixed with professional curiosity. "Please sit down, Mr. Thorne," Sylvia said softly. Her voice was low, but it carried more weight than his shouting. "You are cluttering my table." Thorne turned red. He sat down heavily, pulling his chair in with a screech. Kendrick and Meredith sat on either side of him, flanking him like bodyguards who were afraid of their own shadows. They looked at me, then looked away. They could not hold my gaze. Thorne cleared his throat and began his performance. "I am putting you on notice, Mr. Hayes. We are filing a motion for summary judgment regarding the Kendrick Hayes Trust. The documents are clear. You are the trustee, but the beneficiary rights are absolute. You have withheld $150,000, causing my client significant financial injury. We are demanding the immediate release of the full principal plus interest by the close of business today, or we will see you in court for theft and fraud." He paused, waiting for a reaction. He wanted me to flinch. He wanted me to look at Sylvia with panic in my eyes. But I just reached into my pocket and pulled out a blue Bic pen. It was a 50-cent pen, the kind you buy in a pack of 12 at the drugstore. I set it on the table and gave it a little spin. It rotated slowly on the polished wood, making a soft, whirring sound. Thorne leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "Look, old man, I know you think you are teaching your son a lesson, but the law does not care about your parenting struggles. The law cares about fiduciary duty. You have a duty to maximize the benefit for Kendrick, not to starve him out because you are having a temper tantrum. We have evidence that the account is active. We have evidence of the balance. Hand it over, or I will strip you of every asset you have left, including that house you seem to love so much." Meredith chimed in, her voice shrill and shaky. "Exactly. We know you have the money, Eldridge. We saw the statement, stop playing games. You are ruining Kendrick's life purely out of spite. It is pathetic." I watched the pen spin round and round. It was hypnotic. I thought about the day I opened that trust fund. I had walked into the bank with dirt under my fingernails and a check for $50,000 in my pocket. The teller had looked at me suspiciously until the manager came over and shook my hand. I had felt so proud that day. I had felt like I was planting a seed that would grow into a mighty tree, a tree that would shelter my son from the storms of life. I did not know I was planting a tree that would eventually grow poison fruit. Kendrick placed a hand on Thorne's arm, silencing the lawyer. He looked at me, and for a second I saw the boy I used to know. I saw the child who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters, but then the mask slipped back into place. The mask of the vice president of strategy. The mask Richard had crafted for him. "Dad," Kendrick said, his tone shifting to a mock reasonableness. "Look at this situation. You are out of your depth here. This is a legal matter. You do not want to go to court against us. It will be public. It will be messy. The neighbors will know. The church will know. Do you really want everyone to know that you stole from your own son I stopped the pen with my index finger. I looked up at him, studying his face. He was trying to blackmail me with shame. He thought that because I was a private man, I was a weak man. He thought I would pay anything to avoid a scene. He did not understand that when you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Just sign the release, Dad. Kendrick continued, pushing a paper across the long table toward me. Give me the money and I will drop the lawsuit. I will even let you keep the house. We can go back to being a family. You can come to Thanksgiving. We can put this all behind us. Put it behind us, I thought. Put behind the insults, the lies, the abandonment, the fact that he treated Richard like a king and me like a servant. He wanted to buy my dignity for $150,000 of my own money. Thorne slammed his hand on the table again, startling Meredith. We are done asking nicely. Sign the paper. Mr. Hayes or I walk out of here and file the complaint. The sheriff will be at your door by dinner time, serving you with a court order. Do you want to spend your retirement fighting legal battles? Do you want to lose everything? The room fell silent. The air conditioner hummed overhead. I looked at Sylvia. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal the trap was set. The bait had been taken. They had committed to their narrative. They had stated on the record that they wanted the money and that they believed I was acting out of malice. They had confirmed that they viewed the trust solely as a financial transaction devoid of any moral obligation. I picked up the cheap blue pen. I clicked it once, twice. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Click, click. I looked at Thorne, looking at his cheap suit and his desperate eyes. I looked at Meredith, looking at her greed and her fear. And finally, I looked at Kendrick, my son, my greatest investment and my greatest loss. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. Are you folks quite finished? I asked. My voice was calm. It was not the voice of a defendant. It was the voice of a judge. Kendrick blinked, confused by my tone. What, I asked. If you are done, I repeated. I sat here and listened to you threaten me. I listened to you call me a thief. I listened to you threaten to take my home again. I listened to you offer to let me come to Thanksgiving dinner as if that were a prize I should be grateful for. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. The view was similar to the one from Kendrick's penthouse, but from here everything looked smaller, clearer. You talk a lot about the law. Mr. Thorne, I said, turning back to face them. You talk about fiduciary duty. You talk about the rights of the beneficiary, but you seem to have skipped over the section of the trust document that defines the conditions of that benefit. What conditions? Thorne scoffed. It is a standard trust. It is money held for the child. It is not a standard trust. Sylvia spoke up for the first time. Her voice cut through the air like a knife. She opened the folder that had been sitting in front of her. She pulled out a single document, aged and yellowed at the edges. She slid it down the table toward Thorne. Read Clause 4, Section 2. Mr. Thorne, read it out loud so your client can hear. It. Thorne picked up the paper, looking annoyed. He adjusted his glasses and squinted at the text. The trustee shall have sole and absolute discretion to disperse funds provided that the beneficiary demonstrates a commitment to the values of the grantor, specifically integrity, hard work, and respect for the source of the funds. He stopped reading. He looked up at Sylvia, then at me. So what? He muttered. This is boilerplate. It means nothing. You cannot prove he lacks integrity. Oh, but we can. I said, walking back to the table. I stood directly behind my chair, gripping the back of it with my hands that were strong from lifting lumber and pouring concrete. You said I was acting out of malice. I said, you said I was withholding the money because I was jealous. But the truth is, Kendrick, I have been waiting. I have been waiting for 20 years for you to show me that you understood where that money came from. It came from you, Kendrick snapped. So what? So what? I echoed quietly that money is not. Money is digits on a screen. Kendrick, that money is my life. It is the winters. I worked without gloves because I couldn't afford new ones. It is the summers. I worked until I passed out from heat exhaustion. It is the vacations we never took. It is the car I drove for 20 years so you could have braces. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a USB drive. I tossed it onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of Kendrick. "Sylvia, play the exhibit," I said. Sylvia tapped her tablet. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. It was the video from the graduation. The sound was crisp and clear. "Richard, you have shown me what it means to have a father who truly invests in my future." Kendrick's voice boomed from the speakers. "You taught me that success is not just about hard work, but about smart positioning." I watched Kendrick's face pale. He stared at himself on the screen, at the arrogance radiating from him. Sylvia tapped the screen again. The video changed. This time it was grainy. Footage from a security camera inside my own house. The date stamp was from the night they came to ask for the loan. The audio was muffled but legible. "Selfish old bastard," Meredith's voice hissed from the speakers. "He is going to die soon anyway, and he cannot take it with him. We will get it all eventually. We just have to wait." Meredith gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. She looked at me with pure horror. I signaled Sylvia to stop the video. The screen went black. "That is your case for integrity, Mr. Thorne?" I asked, pointing at the black screen. "That is your evidence of respect? You come into my house, you insult me, you wish for my death, and then you come here and demand the fruit of my labor. You demand the harvest, but you spit on the farmer." Kendrick stood up, knocking his chair over. "Dad, that was just talk. We were stressed. We didn't mean it." "You meant every word I said," coldly. "You meant it because Richard taught you that people like me are just stepping stones for people like you. You thought I was a resource, Kendrick. You thought I was a bank account with a heartbeat." I picked up the Bic pen again and slipped it into my pocket. "Clause 4, Section 2 gives me the power to determine if the beneficiary is worthy," I said. "And as of this morning, I have made my determination." I looked at Sylvia. "Do it." Sylvia pulled a second document from her folder. She stamped it with a heavy metal stamp. The sound was like a gunshot in the room. "What are you doing?" Thorne yelled, standing up. "I am exercising my discretion as trustee," I said, looking Kendrick in the eye. "I have dissolved the Kendrick Hayes Trust, effective immediately. The assets have been liquidated and transferred." "Transferred where?" Kendrick whispered, his voice trembling. "Transferred where, Dad? That is my money." "It was never your money," I said, leaning in close. "It was an opportunity, and you missed it." Thorne began to shout about injunctions and appeals, but I stopped listening. I looked at Kendrick one last time. I saw the panic rising in his eyes. The realization that the safety net he thought was there had been cut away. "You wanted to see the law at work." "Mr. Thorne," I said, turning to the door. "Well, here is the law of the harvest. You reap what you sow, and my son has sown nothing but wind. So now he gets to harvest the whirlwind." I walked toward the door, my boots heavy on the marble floor. I did not look back. I did not need to. The meeting was over. The lesson had been delivered. Now I just had to show them where the money went, and that was going to be the hardest lesson of all. The room was silent, save for the hum of the hard drive spinning up. Sylvia sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, looking like a sphinx guarding a tomb. Thorne was still holding the document, his eyes scanning the paragraph as if he could change the words by staring at them hard enough. He let out a scoff, a sound of dismissal that was meant to be confident but came out sounding thin and nervous. "This is ridiculous," Thorne said, tossing the paper back onto the mahogany surface. "Clause 4.2. He says the grantor reserves the right to withhold funds based on the beneficiary's adherence to family values. Specifically, the respect for the origin of the capital. This is subjective nonsense, Mr. Hayes. You cannot quantify respect. You cannot take $150,000 away from a young man because he didn't send you a thank you card for a birthday gift. No judge will uphold this. This is vague and unenforceable." Sylvia smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just watched the prey step into the snare. "It is not vague, Mr. Thorne," Sylvia said. Her voice was smooth like polished glass. "It is quite specific. The clause states that the beneficiary must acknowledge and respect the labor that created the wealth. If the beneficiary actively disparages the source of the funds or attributes the success to a third party, the trust is voidable. Is that clear enough for you?" Thorne waved his hand dismissively. "You have no proof of disparagement. My client loves his father. He respects him. We are here because of a misunderstanding, not a lack of respect." Kendrick nodded eagerly, looking at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Exactly. Dad, I respect you. I have always respected you. Richard and I just have a different way of doing business, but that does not mean I do not value your hard work. I looked at my son. He was sweating. The collar of his shirt was damp. He was lying. He was lying to save his skin, just like he had lied to himself for years. Sylvia reached for a small remote control lying next to her tablet. She pointed it at the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall behind us. "Let us review the evidence," Sylvia said. The screen flickered to life. The room dimmed slightly as the blue light from the monitor washed over our faces. Kendrick shifted in his seat. Meredith crossed her arms, looking bored and irritated, as if this were just another lecture she had to endure. The first video began to play. It was footage from the graduation ceremony barely 2 months ago. The camera angle was from the audience, likely filmed by a proud parent sitting a few rows back. The audio was crisp. On the screen, Kendrick stood at the podium in his cap and gown. He looked triumphant. He looked like a king addressing his subjects. "I want to thank the man who made this possible." Kendrick's voice boomed through the conference room speakers. "Richard Kavanaugh. You taught me that true value comes from leverage, not labor. You showed me that to get ahead, you have to leave the dirt behind. You are the father who truly invested in my future." The video froze on Kendrick's smiling face, frozen in that moment of ultimate betrayal. Thorne shifted in his chair. He loosened his tie. "That is just a speech," he mumbled. "It is just flowery language for a step-parent. It does not prove he disrespects you." Sylvia did not argue. She just pressed the button again. The screen changed. This time the video was black and white. It was high-definition security footage from a camera mounted in the corner of my garage. The timestamp was from the night of the storm, the night they came to beg for the mortgage. Kendrick and Meredith were standing in the center of the frame. Their body language was aggressive, violent. They looked like invaders. The audio crackled to life. "Your father is a selfish, bitter old man." Meredith's voice hissed through the speakers, sharp and clear. "He is just a laborer, Kendrick. He lays bricks. He does not understand finance. He is jealous of you because you are going to be a master of the universe. And he is just a worker ant." I watched Meredith's face in the conference room. She turned pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at herself on the screen, staring at the ugliness she had unleashed in private, now broadcast for the world to see. The video continued. Kendrick's voice came next. "He is holding on to this house out of spite. He wants to see me fail. He is useless to us if he won't leverage the asset." Then came the final blow, the words that had sealed their fate. "He is going to die soon anyway," Meredith said on the recording, waving her hand dismissively. "We just have to wait. We will get it all eventually." Sylvia paused the video. The room was dead silent. The silence was heavy, suffocating. It pressed down on us like a physical weight. Thorne looked at the screen, then at his clients. He looked disgusted. Even he, a man who made his living defending scumbags, looked repulsed. I looked at Meredith. She was trembling. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the table, unable to lift her head. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was the shame of being caught. I turned my gaze to Kendrick. He was staring at the screen, his eyes wide with horror. He knew right then that there was no coming back from this. He knew that no amount of apologizing, no amount of explaining could erase the truth of those words. Sylvia placed the remote down gently on the table claws. 4.2, Sylvia said, her voice cutting through the silence. "The beneficiary must respect the source of the funds. The source of the funds. Mr. Thorne is Eldridge Hayes. It is his labor. It is his sweat. It is the bricks he laid and the concrete he poured. Your clients have made it abundantly clear that they view his labor as beneath them. They view him as a resource to be exploited and then discarded. They wait for his death so they can consume what he built." Thorne closed his folder. He did not slam it this time. He closed it quietly with a sense of finality. He looked at Kendrick, then he looked at me. "Mr. Hayes," Thorne said, his voice quiet. I was not aware of these recordings. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "There is a lot you are not aware of," I said. "You are not aware that I paid for that suit Kendrick is wearing. You are not aware that I paid for the car he drove to his first date with Meredith. You are not aware that every single step he took up the ladder was paid for by the man he calls a worker." Aunt Kendrick started to cry. It was a soft, pathetic sound. "Dad, Please. We were desperate. We were scared. We didn't mean it. You meant it, I said softly. You meant it because you thought I couldn't hear you. You thought I was just the scenery in the movie of your life. You forgot that the scenery is what holds the roof up. Sylvia opened a new document on her tablet. She looked at Thorne. Based on the evidence presented, my client has determined that the beneficiary has violated the terms of the trust. Therefore, pursuant to the powers granted to the trustee, the Kendrick Hayes Trust has been dissolved. Dissolved? Thorne asked. What does that mean exactly? It means the trust no longer exists, Sylvia said. The funds have been removed from the account. The balance is zero. Zero! Meredith shrieked. She jumped up from her chair, knocking it over. Zero. You cannot do that. That is our money. We need that money. The IRS is coming for us. We are going to lose everything. You have already lost everything. I said, standing up. My voice filled the room, authoritative and final. You lost your integrity. You lost your family. And now you have lost the free ride. Kendrick looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, making tracks in the sweat. Dad, where is the money? You have it right? You just moved it to another account. You are just teaching us a lesson, right? You are going to give it back once we apologize. We are apologizing, Dad. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Richard was a mistake. You were right. I looked at him and I felt a deep, aching pity. He was 20, 4 years old, and he was still a child begging for a handout. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a negotiation. He thought this was a game. The money is gone, Kendrick, I said. I did not move it to another savings account. I spent it. Spent it, Meredith gasped. All of it. $150,000. You spent it in 2 days on what? A sports car? A vacation? You are lying. I walked over to the door. I placed my hand on the handle. The cool metal felt grounding. I did not buy a car, I said. I bought a future, but not for you. Thorne stood up, picking up his briefcase. He looked at Kendrick and shook his head. Mr. Hayes, I am withdrawing as your counsel. You can expect a bill for my time today, and I suggest you find a bankruptcy attorney because you are going to need one. Thorne walked past me, muttering an apology under his breath. He knew when a ship was sinking and he wasn't going to go down with it. Kendrick and Meredith were left alone at the long table, sitting in the wreckage of their own greed. The screen behind them was still frozen on the image of the garage, a permanent testament to their folly. Dad, Kendrick whispered, please help us. I looked at him one last time. I did not feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound sense of closure. The cord had been cut, not by me, but by him. You have a master's degree in finance, Kendrick, I said. Figure it out. I walked out of the conference room and Sylvia followed me. We walked down the hallway toward the elevators, leaving them behind in the lion's den. The air in the hallway felt cleaner, lighter. I had walked in carrying a burden I had carried for 20 years, and I was walking out free. Sylvia pressed the elevator button. She looked at me, a small smile playing on her lips. That was brutal. Eldridge, she said. It was necessary, I replied. Where are we going now? She asked. I checked my watch. It was almost noon. The rain had stopped outside and the sun was breaking through the clouds. We are going to the trade school, I said. I want to see the new welding equipment. I want to see what a real investment looks like. The elevator doors opened and we stepped inside. As the doors closed, I could still hear Meredith screaming in the distance, a faint echo of entitlement, dying, a painful death. I did not look back. I pressed the button for the lobby and watched the numbers descend, taking me back to the ground level, back to the earth, back to the work that makes the world go round. I did not need to be inside that elevator to know what happened. The physics of a collapse are the same, whether it is a building or a marriage. When the load-bearing walls are removed, the roof comes down, and Sylvia and I had just removed the only pillar holding up the union of Kendrick and Meredith. The money was gone, the trust was dissolved, and as the heavy steel doors of the elevator slid shut, isolating them from the world, the silence that followed must have lasted exactly 3 seconds before the explosion occurred. The elevator began its descent, a smooth, silent drop that made your stomach lurch just a little. But for Kendrick, the sensation of falling was not just physical, it was existential. He was standing in the corner of the cab, staring at his reflection in the polished brass handrail. His face was pale, his eyes wide and vacant. He was a man who had walked into a room, a millionaire, and walked out a pauper. He was likely waiting for Meredith to comfort him, waiting for her to put a hand on his shoulder and tell him that they would figure it out together, that love would conquer bankruptcy. But Meredith was not looking at him with love. She was looking at him with the kind of hatred that only burns when a fantasy is incinerated. She was looking at him and realizing that the golden ticket she thought she had punched was actually a one-way pass to nowhere. "You are useless!" she screamed. Her voice bounced off the metal walls, shrill and deafening. "You are absolutely useless, Kendrick. How could you let him do that? How could you sit there and let that old man humiliate us and steal our money?" Kendrick flinched as if she had struck him. He looked up, blinking rapidly. "Meredith, please keep your voice down. We are in an elevator." "I do not care where we are," Meredith yelled, stepping closer to him, invading his personal space. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure rage, the veins in her neck standing out like cords. "You told me he was stupid. You told me he was a simple laborer who didn't understand finance. You said he was just holding the money for you. You said it was a sure thing, Kendrick, a sure thing. He tricked us." Kendrick stammered, his hands raising in a pathetic defensive gesture. "He had recordings, Meredith. He had video. He planned this. He ambushed us." "He didn't ambush us," Meredith spat. She poked a manicured finger into his chest hard. "He outsmarted you. He outsmarted the great Kendrick Hayes, the vice president of strategy. You let a bricklayer outmaneuver you because you are arrogant and you are weak. You sat there and cried, Kendrick. You cried like a baby while he walked away with our future." "It was not our future," Kendrick said, his voice rising slightly, finding a tiny spark of defiance. "It was my trust fund, Meredith. My name was on it and he stole it. But we can fix this. We can find another lawyer. We can appeal." "With what money?" Meredith laughed, and it was a cold, harsh sound devoid of any humor. "With what money are we going to hire a lawyer, Kendrick? You have $1,000 in tax debt. You have a lease you cannot pay. Your credit cards are maxed out, and now your secret safety net is gone. We are not just broke. We are drowning, and I am not going to drown with you." Kendrick looked at her, stunned. "Meredith, what are you saying? We are married. We are a team." "You said you believed in me." "I believed in the portfolio." Meredith corrected him. Her voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow crueler than the screaming, "I believed in the assets. Kendrick, I believed in the future you promised me. The penthouse, the cars, the galas. I didn't sign up for poverty. I didn't sign up to live in a studio apartment and clip coupons because you were too stupid to secure your inheritance. But you love me." Kendrick whispered the words, sounding fragile in the air. "You said you loved me for who I am." Meredith looked at him, and for a second her face went blank, devoid of emotion, almost robotic. "Who are you, Kendrick?" she asked simply. "Without Richard's connections, without your father's money, who are you?" "You are a 24-year-old with a mountain of debt and no job. I loved the potential. I loved the Thaxi Tai Chin who was going to take over the city. I loved the man who was going to give me the life I deserve. I did not love a loser with a daddy complex who gets fired on his first day and disowned by the only person with actual cash." The elevator dinged softly, signaling they had reached the lobby. The doors began to slide open, revealing the marble expanse of the building's entrance. People were walking by, professionals in suits, couriers with packages, life going on as usual, unaware of the tragedy unfolding in the steel box. Meredith straightened her dress, smoothing out the wrinkles invisible to everyone but her. She took a deep breath, composing her face into a mask of indifference. She looked down at her left hand at the diamond ring Kendrick had bought her on credit, a ring that Richard had helped him pick out. Kendrick reached out to her. "Meredith, wait, we can talk about this tonight? We can go to my mom's house?" "No," Meredith said. She reached for her ring finger. She twisted the band violently. It was tight, but she forced it over her knuckle, scratching her skin in the process. She pulled the ring off, holding it up to the light for a second, staring at it with disdain. "I am not going to your mother's house," she said. "Your mother is just as delusional as you are, and this," she held up the ring, "this is just another piece of debt, isn't it? You probably haven't even paid off the interest on it yet." "Meredith, don't," Kendrick pleaded, stepping forward. She threw it. It was a short, sharp motion. The ring flew through the air and hit Kendrick squarely in the chest. It bounced off his tie and fell to the floor, rolling across the elevator threshold and coming to rest on the lobby carpet with a dull thud. Pawn it, she said coldly. It might buy you a bus ticket out of town, because you definitely cannot afford to stay here. She stepped out of the elevator, walking right past him. She did not look back. She walked across the lobby, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble, a sound of finality. She walked through the revolving doors and out onto the street, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd. Kendrick stood alone in the elevator. The doors tried to close, but he put his hand out, automatically stopping them. He looked down at the ring lying on the carpet. It looked small. It looked insignificant. It was just a piece of metal and carbon, a shiny object that he had traded his soul to possess. He stepped out of the elevator and bent down to pick it up. His hands were shaking so badly it took him 2 tries. He clutched the ring in his fist, feeling the sharp edges dig into his palm. He looked around the lobby. People were staring. The security guard was watching him the same way. People watch a car wreck with a mix of curiosity and relief that it isn't them. Kendrick walked toward the exit. He moved like an old man, his shoulders slumped, his head down. He pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The weather had turned while they were inside. The blue sky was gone, replaced by heavy gray clouds that hung low over the skyscrapers. The wind was whipping through the concrete canyons of the city, carrying the smell of ozone and wet pavement. And then the rain started. It didn't start slow. It started all at once, a torrential downpour that soaked through Kendrick's expensive suit in seconds. The cold water ran down his neck, mixing with the sweat and the tears he was trying to hold back. People around him opened umbrellas or ran for cover, seeking shelter in doorways and coffee shops. But Kendrick just stood there. He stood in the middle of the sidewalk holding a ring that belonged to a wife who no longer wanted him wearing a suit for a job that didn't exist, standing in a city where he owed everyone and owned nothing. He looked up at the sky, letting the rain hit his face, hoping it would wash away the shame, hoping it would wake him up from this nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was the reality he had built, brick by brick, lie by lie. He thought about calling Richard, but Richard was in a federal holding cell. He thought about calling Francine, but she was likely hysterical and useless. He thought about calling me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It was wet, slippery in his hand. He scrolled to my name, Eldridge. His thumb hovered over the call button. He imagined my voice. He imagined me answering calmly, sitting in my truck, perhaps driving to the trade school. He imagined me asking him if he had learned the lesson yet. He couldn't do it. The shame was too great. The bridge was not just burned, it was incinerated. He realized then that he was truly alone. He was an orphan of his own making. He put the phone back in his pocket. He looked down at the ring in his hand again. He walked over to a sewer grate near the curb. Water was rushing into it, a dark, swirling vortex carrying away cigarette butts and trash. Kendrick opened his hand. He held the ring over the dark water. For a second he thought about dropping it, letting it go, letting it join the rest of the refuse, but he didn't. He closed his fist tight. He couldn't let it go. It was the last asset he had, the last scrap of value, survival instinct. The one thing he had actually inherited from me finally kicked in. He put the ring in his pocket. He turned up his collar against the wind and started walking. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to keep moving. Because if he stopped, the weight of his invisible life would crush him flat, right there on the sidewalk. And as he walked, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean, indifferent to the ruin of a young man who thought he was better than the rain. The eviction did not happen with a bang. It happened with a beep. The little red light on the card reader at the entrance of the Pinnacle was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. I tapped the card again, thinking it was a mistake, thinking it was just the rain interfering with the sensor beep red light, access denied. I tapped it a third time, desperate now, slamming the plastic against the reader. The doorman, the same one who had looked at my father's boots with disdain a month ago, watched me from behind the glass. He did not open the door. He picked up a phone, spoke a few words, and then turned his back on me. I stood there in the pouring rain, realizing that my key did not work because my lease had been terminated. The electronic lock was smarter than I was. It knew I was broke before I had even admitted it to myself. I looked up at the 42nd floor, expecting to see the lights of my penthouse, expecting to see Meredith, maybe changing her mind. But the windows were dark. My clothes were in there. My laptop was in there. My life was in there, and I was locked out. Then I saw the car. It was a black sedan parked across the street, idling with its lights off. It was not a police car. It was something worse. I recognized the driver. It was a man I had seen at Richard's office once. A man Richard had introduced as a private investor. The man was large, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, and he was looking right at me. Fear is a cold thing. It starts in your stomach and spreads to your fingers until you cannot make a fist. I knew why he was there. The $50,000 tax debt was the government's problem, but the loans Richard had taken out in my name from private lenders were a different beast. Those debts had high interest rates and physical penalties for non-payment, and Richard was in jail, which meant I was the next available target. The man in the car opened his door. I did not wait to see what he wanted. I ran. I ran down the slick sidewalk, my expensive leather shoes slipping on the wet concrete. I ran past the coffee shops and the closed boutiques. I ran until my lungs burned, and the stitch in my side felt like a knife. I ducked into an alley, weaving through trash cans and puddles, trying to lose a pursuer I wasn't even sure was following me. But paranoia has its own footsteps, and they sounded loud in my ears. I walked for hours. I walked until the city skyline faded behind me and the neighborhoods changed from glass and steel to brick and siding. I walked until my feet blistered and my suit was heavy with water. I walked to the only place on earth where the door had never been locked to me before today. My father's house looked exactly the same as it had for 20 years. The porch light was on a beacon of yellow warmth in the dark, wet night. The oak tree stood guard in the front yard, its leaves rustling in the wind. I stood at the end of the driveway, shivering uncontrollably. I looked at the windows, hoping to see a shadow, hoping to see him. I was not the vice president of strategy anymore. I was not a master of finance. I was a frightened boy who had broken something valuable and needed his dad to fix it. I walked up the driveway, my feet crunching on the gravel, the same gravel Meredith had complained about, the same gravel I had sworn never to walk on again. I reached the front door. The wood was solid oak, stripped and stained by my father's hands. I raised my fist and knocked Dad. I called out, my voice weak and hoarse. "Dad, please let me in." There was no answer. I knocked harder, the panic rising in my chest. I looked over my shoulder, expecting to see the black sedan pulling up, expecting to see the man with the thick neck. Dad opened the door. "They are going to kill me, Dad. I am serious. Open up." I heard the heavy deadbolt slide back. The sound was loud, purely mechanical. The door opened slowly, revealing my father. He was wearing his flannel robe and holding a mug of tea. He looked at me, standing there dripping wet, covered in mud and shame. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had checked the weather forecast and knew a storm was coming. "Dad," I fell to my knees. I didn't mean to. It just happened. My legs gave out under the weight of my fear and my exhaustion. I knelt on the welcome mat, the coarse fibers digging into my skin. "Help me, Dad," I sobbed, grabbing the hem of his robe. "Please, you have to help me. I have nowhere to go." Meredith left me. The landlord locked me out. There are men following me. Richard owed money to bad people. Dad, and now they think I have it. My father looked down at me. He did not reach out a hand to pull me up. He did not step aside to let me in. He stood in the doorway, blocking the warmth of the house with his body. "Get up, Kendrick," he said. His voice was not angry, it was tired. It was the voice of a man who was done repeating himself. I scrambled to my feet, shaking like a leaf. "Dad, I need the money, I need the trust fund. I know you dissolved it, I know you moved it, but you have to give it to me. Just this once I will pay you back. Swear I will work for you. I will mix cement. I will carry bricks. I will do anything. Just give me the $150,000 I need to pay them off tonight, or they are going to hurt me." My father took a sip of his tea. He looked past me at the empty street, checking to see if I was truly being followed or if I was just running from my own shadow. "The money is not here. Kendrick," he said. "I know it is not here," I cried. "You moved it. Transfer it back. Write me a check. Dad, please. I am your son. You cannot let me die over money. I am not letting you die." "Kendrick," my father said. He looked me in the eye, and for the first time I saw something in his gaze that terrified me more than the loan sharks. It was indifference. The cord had been cut, and he was not going to tie it back together. "The money is gone," he said, clearly enunciating every word. "Gone." I stared at him, wiping the rain from my eyes. "What do you mean, gone? You cannot spend $150,000 in 2 days. That is impossible. You are lying. You are hiding it to teach me a lesson." Okay, I learned the lesson. I am humbled. I am on my knees. Look at me, Dad. I am begging you. It is not a lesson anymore, Kendrick. It is a transaction, my father said, and the transaction is complete. I did not hide the money. I did not move it to an offshore account. I spent it. I wrote the checks. I signed the contracts. The account balance is 0.00. My legs gave out again and I sat down heavily on the wet porch. 0. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. 0 meant no lawyers. 0 meant no protection. 0 meant I was facing the wolves with nothing but my bare hands. You spent it on what? I whispered, my voice trembling with hysteria. On what, Dad? A boat. A cabin. What could be more important than my life? My father looked down at me with a strange expression. It was not pity. It was almost pride, but not for me. I spent it on the future, he said. I spent it on people who know the value of $1. I spent it on people who say thank you. Stepped back and started to close the door. Dad, no. I lunged forward, putting my hand on the door jamb. Do not shut me out. Please, I have nowhere to go. Let me sleep on the couch. Let me sleep on the floor. I will leave in the morning. Just don't leave me out here in the dark. My father looked at my hand gripping the door frame. He looked at my face, wet with rain and tears. He sighed, a deep, heavy sound that came from his soul. You chose your family, Kendrick, he said softly. You chose Richard. You chose the penthouse. You chose the image. You walked out of this house a long time ago tonight. You are just realizing that you cannot walk back in simply because it is raining. He gently pushed my hand off the door frame. Go to the police if you are in danger, Kendrick. Go to a shelter if you are cold, but do not come here asking for money that you spit on. The door closed. The deadbolt slid home with a final clack. I stood there on the porch staring at the wood, staring at the grain that my father had polished. The porch light flickered and then went out, leaving me in the darkness. I turned around and looked out at the street. The rain was falling harder now, washing away the gravel, washing away my footprints. I was alone. The money was gone. The father I had taken for granted was gone. And somewhere in the darkness, the consequences of my arrogance were waiting for me. Inside a black sedan, I had hit rock bottom. And I realized with a terrifying clarity that rock bottom is not a place you can buy your way out of. It is a place you have to climb out of. And I had forgotten how to climb. The ride to the south side was silent, save for the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers fighting against the storm. Kendrick sat in the passenger seat of my Ford truck, hugging his knees, shivering in his wetsuit. He looked like a drowned rat, expensive but pathetic. He kept looking out the window as we passed the clean, well-lit streets of downtown and crossed over into the neighborhoods where the streetlights were broken and the potholes could swallow a tire. He thought I was taking him to a bank. He thought I had a secret stash hidden under a mattress in some old rental property. He still had hope, and that was the cruelest part of the night because I was about to kill that hope once and for all. We pulled up to a large brick building on 79th Street. It used to be a textile factory back in the 50s. Then it was a storage unit. Then it was abandoned for a decade. The windows were boarded up with plywood, but light spilled out through the cracks. The sign above the door was hand-painted and barely legible, the Hayes Community Trade Center. Kendrick looked at the building, then at me with confusion and fear. Dad, he whispered, is this safe? Why are we here? Is this where you hid the cash? I turned off the engine. The truck shuddered and died, leaving us in the sudden quiet. I looked at my son. He was terrified of the neighborhood, terrified of the grit, terrified of the very people I had spent my life working alongside. Get out, I said, opening my door. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was thick and cold. Kendrick stumbled out of the truck looking around nervously, expecting a mugger to jump out from the shadows. He followed me closely, stepping in my footprints as I walked to the heavy steel door. I took out a key ring, not the single sleek key fob of a luxury penthouse, but a heavy ring with 30 brass keys that jingled like chimes. I found the right one and unlocked the door, pushing it open with my shoulder. The smell hit us first. It was the smell of sawdust and ozone, of hot metal and fresh paint. It was the smell of creation. The sound followed the high-pitched whine of a table, saw the crackle of an arc welder, the rhythmic pounding of hammers. It was 10 o'clock at night, but inside this building the day was just beginning. I flipped a switch on the wall and the overhead industrial lights buzzed to life, illuminating the main hall. Kendrick gasped. He blinked rapidly, trying to process what he was seeing. The cavernous room was filled with rows of brand-new workbenches, bright yellow and sturdy. In the corner stood 3 industrial-grade Miller welding machines, still gleaming with that factory shine. Along the back wall were racks of DeWalt power tools, saws, drills, sanders, all organized and tagged. In the center of the room was the skeleton of a small house being framed out with fresh 2x4s, smelling of pine. "This is not a bank," Kendrick said, his voice echoing in the large space. "What is this place?" "Dad." I walked over to the nearest workbench and ran my hand along the smooth wood. "This is the investment, Kendrick," I said. "This is the trust fund." Kendrick walked deeper into the room, looking around wildly. He looked at the equipment, counting the cost in his head. "That welder is $5,000, he muttered. "That table saw is $3,000. The lumber alone is worth a fortune." "Dad, what did you do?" I heard footsteps coming from the back office. A young man walked out, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He was about 19 years old, black, wearing a pair of oil-stained coveralls that were 2 sizes too big for him. His name was Marcus, and 6 months ago he was sleeping in a bus stop. Now he was my foreman in training. "Mr. Hayes," Marcus called out, a wide smile breaking across his face. "We didn't expect you tonight, Pops. We just finished wiring the breaker panel on the mock-up. Come check it out, I think. I finally got the grounding right." Marcus stopped when he saw Kendrick. He took in the wet, expensive suit, the mud on the shoes, the terrified look in the eyes. Marcus looked at me for an explanation. "Marcus, this is my biological son, Kendrick," I said calmly. "Kendrick, this is Marcus. He is studying to be a master electrician." Marcus wiped his hand on his pants again and extended it toward Kendrick. "Nice to meet you, man." Kendrick did not shake his hand. He stared at Marcus as if he were an alien. He stared at the coveralls. He stared at the grease. He looked at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "You spent my money on this," Kendrick whispered, ignoring Marcus completely. "You spent $150,000 on tools, on a school for them." I nodded slowly. "I spent it on the future, Kendrick. Just like the trust document said, I invested in people who respect the source of the funds." Kendrick ran over to the welding machines, grabbing the handle of one as if he could drag it out the door. "Dad, we can sell these. We can return them. Most of this stuff looks new. We can get maybe 80 cents on the dollar. That is still over $100,000. We can fix this. Call the supplier. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you want a refund." I walked over to him and pried his fingers off the machine. "It is not a mistake, Kendrick. The receipts are filed. The warranties are registered. The equipment belongs to the center now. It belongs to Marcus. It belongs to the 20 other kids who come here every day after school to learn a trade, because they know that a trade is the only thing that nobody can take away from them." "But it is my money," Kendrick screamed, his voice cracking. He was crying openly now, collapsing against the cold metal of the welder. "It was supposed to be for me. I am your son. I have a master's degree. I am special." I looked at Marcus, who was watching the scene with quiet intensity. Marcus had never had a father. He had never had a trust fund. He had worked double shifts at a car wash just to buy his own boots. "Marcus, come here," I said. Marcus stepped forward, respectful and alert. "Yes, sir." "Tell him what you told me yesterday when the new saws arrived," I said. Marcus looked at Kendrick, then back at me. He stood up straighter. He said, "Mr. Hayes gave us a chance when nobody else would. He told us that these tools aren't charity, they are responsibility. He said that if we learn to use them, we will never be hungry. He said that a man who can build his own house never has to worry about being locked out." I looked at Kendrick. "Do you hear that?" I asked softly. "That is respect. Kendrick, that is gratitude. These boys call me Pops. They call me Mr. Hayes or Godfather Eldridge. They ask me for advice, not for money. They thank me for the opportunity to work. You have never thanked me for work. You only thanked me for the check." Kendrick slid down to the floor, hugging his knees, sitting in the sawdust. "You chose them over me," he sobbed. "You replaced me." "I did not replace you," I said, kneeling down, so I was eye level with him. "You resigned. You resigned the day you stood on that stage and thanked Richard. You resigned the day you let your wife call me a selfish old man. You resigned every time you looked at my hands with disgust, expecting them to be clean while demanding the money they earned. These boys are not my biological children, but they are my spiritual heirs. They value what I value, and that makes them more my family than you have been in 10 years. Kendrick looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "Can I stay here?" he whispered. "Can I sleep here tonight? I have nowhere to go." I looked around the shop. It was warm. It was safe. It was filled with the promise of work. But it was a place for builders, not for beggars. "You can sleep in the office on the cot tonight," I said, standing up. "But tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. you leave. The students arrive at 7, and I will not have them see a grown man feeling sorry for himself amidst the tools of his salvation." Kendrick nodded, defeated. He stood up shakily and walked toward the office, huddled in his wet jacket. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at the tools. He just looked at the floor, Marcus. Watched him go, then looked at me. "Mr. Hayes," he asked quietly, "is he going to be okay?" I put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, feeling the solid muscle of a young man who worked for a living. "He has a hard road ahead of him, Marcus," I said. "He has to learn how to build from the ground up, and he is starting 20 years late. But that is his journey, not ours. Come on, show me that breaker panel. I want to see if you grounded it like I taught you." We walked over to the wooden frame, leaving Kendrick in the shadows of the office. For the first time all night, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. The money was gone. Yes, but looking at Marcus, inspecting his work, seeing the pride in his eyes, I knew it wasn't lost. It was planted. And unlike the investment I had made in Kendrick, this crop was going to survive the winter. I spent the next hour teaching Marcus about circuit loads, explaining the intricacies of commercial wiring. We laughed. We worked. We got our hands dirty. And in the background, the sound of Kendrick's sobbing eventually faded into the hum of the ventilation system, replaced by the steady, enduring rhythm of work. The trade school was not just a building. It was a fortress against the kind of weakness that had destroyed my son. And as I looked around at the bright yellow tools shining under the lights, I knew I had made the best deal of my life. I had traded a fortune of paper for a legacy of steel, and that is a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. 6 months is a long time in the world of finance where fortunes are made and lost in a microsecond. But it is an eternity in the world of janitorial services where time is measured in footsteps and floor wax. I know this because for the last 180 days, I have been living my life one tile at a time. My name is Kendrick Hayes, and I used to be a vice president of strategy. Now I am the night shift porter for a building I used to dream of working in. The buffer machine is heavy. It vibrates against my ribs, a constant low-frequency hum that has replaced the sound of my own ambition. It is 3 o'clock in the morning, and the lobby of this skyscraper is silent, save for the squeak of my rubber-soled shoes and the whir of the cleaning pads. I wear a gray uniform that itches at the collar. My name is stitched on the pocket in red thread, but nobody ever reads it. To the people who work here, the lawyers and the bankers and the captains of industry, I am just part of the furniture. I am a ghost that ensures their world is shiny when they arrive at 8 a.m. I push the machine across the expansive marble floor, moving in slow, deliberate arcs, back and forth, back and forth. It is ironic, really. My father used to mow his lawn like this, creating perfect lines in the grass. I used to watch him from my bedroom window and think about how small his life was. How repetitive. Now I understand that the repetition is the only thing that keeps you sane. When you focus on the shine of the floor, you do not have to think about the penthouse you lost, or the wife who pawned your wedding ring, or the friends who blocked your number when the money ran out. I stopped the machine to wipe sweat from my forehead. The air conditioning in the building is set to low at night to save energy. It was humid in the lobby. The building manager, Mr. Henderson, came rushing out of the security office. He was a nervous little man who treated the cleaning staff like we were contagious. "Hurry up, Hayes," he hissed, clapping his hands together. "You missed a spot near the turnstiles. The chairman is coming down early this morning. He has a breakfast meeting with the investors from Tokyo. The floor needs to look like glass. Do you understand me?" "Glass?" I nodded, gripping the handle of the buffer. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. I will take care of it." I did not ask who the chairman was. I did not care. Rich men were all the same to me now. They were just shoes that scuffed my floors. They were just eyes that looked through me. I went back to work, guiding the machine toward the elevators. I focused on a black scuff mark, rubbing it away, erasing the evidence of human passage. I had never really looked at the name of the building. I knew it was called the H Tower. I assumed it stood for some faceless conglomerate or maybe a hedge fund. I was just happy to have the job. Marcus, the boy from the trade school, had put in a good word for me. He had told me that they were hiring and that the pay was decent. It was minimum wage, but it was money I could touch. Money that didn't come with strings or lies. At 3:30, the elevator chime rang out. It was a soft, melodic sound that signaled the arrival of the gods. From the penthouse suites, Mr. Henderson smoothed his tie and ran to the center of the lobby, looking terrified. He motioned for me to move out of the way. "Get back, Hayes," he whispered furiously. "Hide that machine behind the planter. Do not let them see the dirt." I dragged the heavy buffer behind a large potted palm tree and stood in the shadows, bowing my head. I was used to hiding. I had been hiding from my reality for half a year. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a golden light inside. 3 men walked out. They were laughing, talking in low, confident tones. 2 of them were Japanese, wearing impeccable dark suits. The 3rd man was walking in the middle. He was taller, broad-shouldered, wearing a 3-piece charcoal suit that fit him like armor. He carried a leather portfolio, and his walk was a masterclass in power. He did not rush. He moved with the weight of a man who owns the earth beneath his feet. I peeked through the leaves of the palm tree expecting to see a stranger, expecting to see just another CEO. But when the man stepped into the light of the lobby chandelier, my heart stopped beating. It literally stopped for a second, leaving a cold void in my chest. The man was clean-shaven. His hair was trimmed, close, salted with gray. The flannel shirt was gone. The work boots were gone, replaced by Italian leather that shone deeper than the floor I had just polished. It was my father. It was Eldridge Hayes. But not the Eldridge I knew. Not the man with the trowel and the dust. This was a titan. This was the man who had built the library, the man who had restored the hospital, the man who had secretly bought the land. This very building stood on while I was busy playing dress-up. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I grabbed the trunk of the palm tree to steady myself. I looked at the wall behind the security desk. For the first time, really looked at it. There in brushed steel letters, 5 feet high, was the logo I had ignored every night, Hayes Holdings. It was him. It was all him. The building. The company. The legacy. He hadn't just invested in a trade school. He owned the skyline, and I was scrubbing his floors. I tried to shrink back to make myself smaller than I already was. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that he would just walk past, that he would be too busy with his Japanese investors to notice the janitor in the shadows. But my father has eyes like a hawk. He stopped mid-sentence. He stopped walking. The sudden stillness drew the attention of the investors and Mr. Henderson. "Is something wrong, Mr. Chairman?" one of the investors asked. My father did not answer. He turned his head slowly, turning his gaze toward the planter where I was hiding. He looked through the leaves. He looked right at me. I could not move. I was frozen in my shame. I was wearing a gray jumpsuit, holding a rag standing in the dirt while he stood in the light. I wanted to say something. I wanted to say, "Dad, it's me." I wanted to say, "I am sorry." I wanted to scream. But the words died in my throat because I saw his eyes. There was no anger there. There was no surprise. There was just recognition, a cool, detached recognition, like a man seeing an old acquaintance he had outgrown. Mr. Henderson rushed forward, sweating profusely. "I am so sorry, sir. I told the staff to clear the area. I will have him removed immediately. He is new. He is a bit slow." My father held up a hand, silencing the manager. He did not look away from me. He took a step closer, just one step enough for me to smell his cologne. It was the smell of sandalwood and success. "Leave him be," my father said. His voice was deep, resonating off the marble walls. "He is doing his job." My father looked at the floor at the spot I had just buffed. It was flawless. "The floors look good," he said, addressing Mr. Henderson but looking at me. "You have a hard-working crew here, Mr. Henderson. Cleanliness is the foundation of a good business." "Yes, sir," Mr. Henderson stammered. "Thank you, sir." My father paused. He looked at my name tag, the red thread that said Kendrick. He looked at my hands, which were red and chapped from the chemicals. He looked at my shoes, which were cheap and worn. Then he looked me in the eye. For a second I thought he was going to hug me. I thought he was going to end the punishment. I thought he was going to say, "Son, come home." But he didn't. "Mr. Henderson," my father said, turning back to the manager, "effective immediately, I want you to increase the hourly wage for the entire night cleaning staff by 10%. Mr. Henderson blinked. 10%, sir. That is significant. They earn it, my father said firmly. They are the ones who make us look good when the sun comes up. People who work with their hands deserve to be compensated fair and square. Isn't that right?" He looked back at me one last time. "Isn't that right?" he repeated. I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that were burning my eyes. "Yes, sir," I whispered. "Yes, sir, it is." My father nodded. A brief, professional nod. It was the nod you give to an employee, a stranger. "Keep up the good work," he said. And then he turned around. He rejoined the investors who were waiting respectfully by the door. He said something in Japanese, and the men laughed. My father spoke Japanese. I didn't even know he had a passport. He walked out of the revolving doors into the waiting limousine. The taillights flared red in the darkness, and then he was gone. I stood there in the lobby, clutching my rag. Mr. Henderson was staring at me, looking confused. "You are a lucky son of a gun, Hayes," he muttered. 10%. The old man is feeling generous today. You should be grateful. I looked at the door where my father had exited. I looked at the empire he had built. The empire I could have been a part of if I hadn't been so blind. I had wanted a rich father. I had wanted a powerful father, and I had one. The whole time I had one, but because he didn't look the way I wanted him to look, because he didn't play the game. The way Richard played it, I had thrown him away. Now I was earning 10% more an hour thanks to his charity, and that 10% felt heavier than any debt I had ever carried. I turned the buffer back on. The machine roared to life, drowning out the silence. I pushed it forward, covering the spot where he had stood, erasing his footprints, leaving nothing but a shine that I could never truly own. My name is Eldridge Hayes, and if you are listening to this story, let me tell you one final thing. Revenge is a dish that people say is best served cold. But I disagree. Revenge is not about serving anything to anyone. It is not about anger. It is not about violence. And it is certainly not about destroying the people who hurt you. The greatest revenge is simply letting people live in the house they built. If they built it with lies, let them live in the cold. If they built it with arrogance, let them live in the loneliness. And if they built it with ingratitude, let them watch from the servant's entrance while you sit at the head of the table. My son is alive. He is healthy. He has a job. He is learning the value of $1 for the first time in his life. I do not hate him. I just do not know him anymore. He is a stranger who cleans my floors, and I am the stranger who signs his checks. That is the way it has to be. Because some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, no matter how much money you have in the bank. I hope you learned something from my story. I hope you learned that the invisible people in your life might be the ones holding up the sky. I hope you learned to say thank you before it is too late. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you think I was too hard on Kendrick or if he got exactly what he deserved. I read every single comment because, unlike my son, I never ignore the people who support me. Until next time, keep building and remember the foundation is everything. I learned that the most expensive mistake a parent can make is shielding their child from the consequences of their actions, because that protection only weakens them. My $150,000 did not disappear. It was simply reallocated from a liability to an asset. True legacy is not about leaving a pile of cash to someone who shares your DNA. It is about leaving a set of values to someone who shares your work ethic. I found my true son in a trade school, not a penthouse, and that has made all the difference. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and hard truths. Do you think I should have given Kendrick a second chance, or did I make the right call investing in Marcus? Let me know in the comments below, because I read every single one. Until next time, remember to build something that lasts.